What kind of ruler becomes rich whenever another citizen survives the night? Lorien Wisteria was about to turn that absurd rule into an empire. His story began when he entered Greywood Town as its disgraced new baron. His expensive deer leather boot immediately sank into foul mud and sewage. That humiliating step perfectly summarized the territory he had inherited. Greywood contained only a few dozen shacks, barely resisting the wind. Blackened straw covered the roofs, while mud swallowed every narrow street. The air smelled like a medieval stable abandoned for several generations. Most residents had not bathed in months, perhaps even longer. Toilets did not exist, so waste covered the ground beside their homes. Thin mothers held thinner children, while frightened men knelt before Lorien. Their patched clothing resembled sacks, and their eyes expected another tyrant. Yet Lorien was not truly the young nobleman standing before them. He had awakened in this world inside a duke's third son. Palace politics destroyed his family before he could enjoy that identity. The court stripped away his property, influence, servants, and protection. Then it exiled him to the poorest corner of the empire. His consolation prize was the lowest noble title and a dying territory. Even stray dogs seemed intelligent enough to avoid Greywood completely. Baller, his elderly butler, approached in a robe made from patches. Tradition demanded that Lorien collect a first meeting tax from his subjects. Unfortunately, those subjects could not afford bread mixed with sawdust. Taking their food would kill them, while taking their daughters was monstrous. Lorien had inherited a kingdom with no humane way to collect revenue. Then a cold notification suddenly sounded inside his mind. The Lord Population Dividend System had activated upon his arrival. Every registered living citizen would generate 1 silver coin each day. The payment required no tax, labor, battle, or commercial transaction. His citizens only needed to remain alive inside his territory. That single condition transformed Greywood from a burden into a gold mine. 1 silver coin could purchase roughly 100 loaves of bread. A peasant family might save only 30 copper coins in an entire year. Since 1 silver equaled 100 coppers, the reward was enormous. Lorien calmly asked Baller for the territory's current population. The old butler opened a moldy census scroll with trembling hands. Greywood once held 850 people, but starvation had reduced it. Only 836 residents remained alive that morning. That meant 836 silver coins every single day. A prosperous viscount might earn 50 gold coins during an entire year. Lorien could surpass that amount in less than 1 week. He almost laughed while calculating the fortune inside his head. Then an elderly farmer collapsed face first into the filthy street. His body twitched twice before becoming completely still. Baller merely prayed and mentioned the mass grave outside town. Death had become so common that nobody considered saving the man. Another notification immediately announced that the population had decreased. Greywood now contained only 835 registered citizens. Tomorrow's reward would therefore contain 1 fewer silver coin. Lorien's delighted expression froze as the financial meaning struck him. That farmer had represented 1 silver coin every day he remained alive. Losing him meant 365 silver coins each year. Over several decades, the missing revenue would become a genuine fortune. Lorien suddenly viewed the dying farmer as a broken money machine. He drew his sword and terrified every guard within hearing distance. They were ordered to lift the farmer, revive him, and find a healer. Lorien threatened to cancel dinner if the man died untreated. Nothing in Greywood would die without its lord's explicit permission. Lorien's command protected every citizen, animal, and even insect in Greywood. His motivation was not kindness, justice, faith, or noble responsibility. Every breathing resident was now a permanent source of passive income. Protecting human life had become the most profitable policy imaginable. The peasants watched their new lord carry a dying commoner like treasure. Lorien even ordered expensive medicine to preserve the farmer's breathing. To him, that fragile heartbeat represented decades of future silver. But back at the manor, Lorien faced a more immediate threat: starvation. Calling the building a manor was generous, because it was a groaning shack. Baller reported 200 pounds of oats, half contaminated with sand. Those supplies were reserved for Lorien and the guards during winter. The peasants were expected to survive by chewing tree bark. Lorien rejected that plan before Baller could finish explaining it. If half the population starved, half his daily income disappeared forever. He would sooner eat his own boots than accept such losses. Lorien focused on the system and silently ordered a withdrawal. His money bag instantly became heavy enough to strain its leather seams. More than 800 silver coins spilled across the wooden table. Their metallic clatter sounded like the most beautiful music he had heard. Baller nearly collapsed when he saw the impossible mountain of money. Lorien had supposedly arrived penniless after his family's destruction, yet he now possessed enough silver to hire a private fighting force. Lorien refused to explain the system or reveal its existence. Instead, he ordered Baller to take guards into Red Leaf City. They would purchase white flour, salted pork, salt, beer, and cloth. Baller initially assumed his lord wanted weapons, armor, or war horses. Lorien corrected him sharply and demanded food of the highest quality. He refused to feed citizens bread filled with stones and sawdust. Baller warned that white bread and meat were considered noble food. Feeding peasants so generously would offend tradition and perhaps the church. Lorien declared that divine dietary opinions did not govern Greywood. If he decided his citizens deserved white bread, they would receive it. The economics made his decision almost embarrassingly simple. Feeding every resident generously might cost 20 silver coins each day. Those same residents generated more than 800 silver coins daily. The resulting return exceeded anything Lorien had seen in his former world. Refusing such an investment would have been financially insane. By evening, 12 food carts rolled into Greywood's miserable central square. 3 enormous iron pots were suspended above fires hot enough to light the mud orange. Cooks filled them with clean water, white flour, coarse salt, and thick pieces of pork. The first wave of savory steam drifted between the collapsing shacks. Starving residents emerged slowly, as though the smell had pulled them back from death. Children stared at the floating meat with hollow eyes and open mouths. Adults swallowed so hard that Lorien could hear them from the manor steps. One exhausted man fainted before the serving line even opened. That collapse showed everyone how close Greywood had come to mass starvation. Lorien climbed the manor steps and waited until every frightened face turned toward him. He announced that the traditional welcome tax was cancelled immediately. No family would surrender food, daughters, or winter supplies to greet its new lord. Instead, every registered citizen would receive meat porridge and 1 white bread roll. Lorien promised that anyone living under Greywood's banner would eat every day. For several breaths, the square remained too silent to feel real. The peasants had spent their lives learning that nobles only took from them. Now, a disgraced young baron was offering food richer than many had ever tasted. The first elderly woman dropped to her knees before anyone else could react. Her family followed, and the rest of the square collapsed into the mud behind them. Men, women, children, and grandparents pressed their foreheads to the ground. They cried that the light god had finally remembered their forgotten town. Some called Lorien a saint, while others promised generations of loyalty. Baller watched the mass devotion with tears gathering in his tired eyes. Lorien accepted their worship with the solemn expression expected from a noble. Inside his mind, however, a much colder calculation was taking place. Every living citizen produced 1 silver coin for him at dawn. Every meal reduced the chance that one of those permanent payments would disappear. The system confirmed that loyalty and territorial stability had risen sharply. Well-fed citizens were less likely to flee, riot, or die before winter. To the crowd, the feast represented mercy from an impossibly generous ruler. To Lorien, protected the most profitable income stream in existence. He ordered the serving line opened before hunger caused another collapse. Guards carried bread baskets forward while cooks filled chipped wooden bowls. Nobody received a thin portion or a bowl padded with water. Each serving contained enough flour, salt, and pork to restore real strength. Parents instinctively fed their children before touching their own meals. Several people began crying after their first taste of meat. Others ate in silence because they feared the food might vanish if they looked away. Baller repeatedly reminded everyone to chew slowly and avoid choking. Lorien paced beside the pots, watching for anyone who seemed too weak to stand. His attention looked compassionate, but every fragile heartbeat felt like endangered revenue. Whenever a bowl emptied, he ordered the cooks to fill it again. The peasants gradually stopped, glancing toward the guards for signs of a hidden punishment. No whip appeared, no tax collector arrived, and nobody demanded repayment. By the second serving, fear gave way to stunned relief. By the third, the square sounded less like a funeral and more like a festival. Children licked grease from their fingers while adults guarded every crumb of bread. Lorien quietly reviewed the cost of the entire feast. Feeding all 835 citizens generously required only about 20 silver coins. Those same citizens returned 835 silver coins merely by surviving until dawn. The food program therefore produced more than 40 times its daily cost. No investment in Lorien's former world had ever offered returns that absurd. Protecting the population was not charity, it was the obvious financial decision. Even 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 began to understand that the young lord's madness followed a strange internal logic. Lorien told him that healthy workers would rebuild 𝗥𝗡𝗜𝗏𝗡 faster than starving ones. He left unspoken that healthy workers also preserved tomorrow's payout. As darkness settled, guards built fires around the square, and near every occupied shack, clean cloth and the driest sleeping spaces went first to children, the elderly, and the sick. The farmer who had collapsed could not be saved, but Lorien ordered him buried with dignity instead of being thrown into the mass grave. Lorien checked the cooking pots, the fires, and the temporary sleeping areas himself. He threatened anyone who allowed a citizen to freeze through carelessness. The guards had never seen a noble monitor peasant survival with such intensity. Most assumed guilt or hidden kindness drove him. Only Lorien knew that every preventable death would reduce his income forever. The final bowls were served long after sunset. Families curled together beside the fires with full stomachs for the first time in years. Some whispered prayers for Lorien until exhaustion finally silenced them. Others kept pieces of white bread wrapped in cloth, because they could not believe more would come. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 reported that every household had eaten and no new deaths had occurred. The news relaxed a pressure inside Lorien that he refused to call concern. 𝗥𝗡𝗜𝗏𝗡 citizens had survived their first day under his rule. The feast had purchased loyalty, stability, labor, and another morning of system income. Lorien returned to his fragile manor while the town slept around dying fires. He lay awake listening for alarms, coughing, or the sound of another body falling. Before dawn, one thought dominated everything else: the population had to remain alive. He woke up to the most beautiful sound in the universe. Not even the sound of birds singing. Not a pretty girl whispering good morning. Nope, that was not happening. Ding, the system notification rang out. Daily settlement complete, the system announced. Population 835. 0 deaths. Payout 835 silver coins. Lorien shot up from his sad little plank bed like it was Christmas morning. Lorien thought withdraw, and silver immediately began clinking onto the bed. Hundreds of brand new silver coins rained down onto his sheets, forming a gorgeous little mountain of pure profit. He grabbed a fistful and just listened to them clink together. His scalp tingled, his toes curled. He thought he made a noise that would be embarrassing if anyone heard it. Yesterday's grocery bill paid back in full, plus hundreds extra in pure profit. At this rate, he could build a marble mansion in this mudhole within a month. But then his business brain kicked in. 8 gold coins each day was extraordinary wealth for a remote frontier baron. Sure, that income was impressive. But raising an army, buying magic scrolls, and returning to the capital would require far more money. Revenge against the nobles who exiled him would demand a far greater fortune. His current income was impressive, but nowhere near enough. The solution was simple. 𝗥𝗡𝗜𝗏 needed more people. 10,000 citizens would generate 100 gold coins every day. 100,000 citizens would transform him into an economic power. A population of 1 million could overwhelm the imperial treasury itself. Lorien imagined burying the palace beneath mountains of his silver. He needed new citizens immediately. As if the universe had read his business plan and answered, Lorien's door suddenly slammed open. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗏𝗏 stumbled in, wheezing like he'd just sprinted a marathon. 𝗥𝗘𝗏𝗏's face was pale as he announced a disaster. Famine and plague had struck the neighboring Red Leaf Viscounty. The Viscount kicked out over 10,000 landless refugees to save his own food supply. Between 3,000 and 4,000 refugees were already moving toward 𝗥𝗡𝗏𝗏. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗏 warned that Red Leaf cavalry was driving the refugees toward 𝗥𝗡𝗏𝗏 with whips. The old man was hopping from foot to foot in panic. 𝗥𝗏𝗏 urged Lorien to seal the gates before the refugees arrived. He also wanted archers positioned along the walls. He feared the refugees would consume their food, spread disease, and trigger riots. Every nearby baron had ordered soldiers to shoot refugees on sight. To medieval nobles, refugees were little more than walking locusts. They saw no money or skills, only hungry mouths that might kill for a moldy crust. Every conventional lord treated a refugee column like a plague of monsters. Lorien heard only one thing: 3,000 to 4,000 people were heading his way. His brain immediately calculated, 3,000 people meant 3,000 silver coins, or 30 gold coins, every day. His current income would quadruple, maybe quintuple, just by letting them in and feeding them. Lorien slapped his thighs, leaped up, and stared at Baller with blazing excitement. He declared that every other lord was blind. Lorien told Baller that the approaching people were not a burden. To Lorien, the refugees were a mountain of gold walking directly into his territory. Baller looked at him as though his young lord had finally lost his mind. Lorien immediately issued a new order. He pulled on his leather armor while shouting instructions like a man possessed. Every available cart in town had to be loaded immediately. The remaining meat and flour from the previous night went first. Pile every remaining supply onto the carts. Every guard would carry a weapon, but not to defend the walls. They were all riding with Lorien to the border. Greywood was preparing a royal welcome. He confirmed that Greywood would welcome every refugee. Baller stared at him in speechless disbelief. Lorien declared that Greywood's gates would remain wide open. No guard was permitted to fire an arrow or harm a single incoming refugee. Anyone who harmed even one refugee would be skinned and turned into a warning at Greywood's gate. An hour later, Lorien rode down the muddy highway beside carts filled with steaming porridge. Ahead marched thousands of barefoot refugees in rags, dragging exhausted children through the mud. Behind them, Red Leaf cavalry cracked whips and forced them toward Greywood. Every other territory had slammed their doors shut. They expected another closed gate, another rejection, and another slow death in the wilderness. Instead, they saw a young nobleman on a chestnut horse staring at them like treasure. His grin was so wide that it unsettled everyone. Behind him waited carts of food, with steam rising into the gray sky. Lorien drew his sword, filled his lungs, and shouted across the wasteland at 4,000 terrified strangers. Lorien declared that Greywood would take everything Red Leaf had thrown away. Anyone willing to swear loyalty could enter his territory. Age, sex, appearance, and smell did not matter to him. He promised free food, free housing, at every meal, and no taxes. Then he ordered the refugees to stop staring and come claim their new home. He nearly called them beautiful money before correcting himself to beautiful people. On that muddy road, a crazed baron offered salvation to thousands of starving strangers. He waved a sword beside a convoy of soup carts while making promises no noble had ever made. That absurd welcome laid the first foundation of a future city holding more than 1 million people. Its foundation was not stone or mortar, but madness and an extraordinary profit margin. The wind was cutting across the wasteland like frozen razors. 3,000 refugees stood there, staring at him as if he had declared the sky green. Nobody moved. Not one person. Lorien was standing on his horse, arms wide open, practically begging people to come eat free meat. They stared at him as if he were a serial killer driving a soup cart. He understood their suspicion. Near the front stood an older man with a soldier's posture and a damaged leg. The refugees called him Old Wolf, though his real name was Jareth. Old Wolf had once served as a border soldier. He had fought half ORCs until a battlefield injury destroyed his leg. The army discarded him as soon as he could no longer fight. He became a farmer and tried to support his remaining family. Then drought destroyed the farm and forced him onto the road again. Now, he stood in the mud, holding a 5-year-old granddaughter who had barely eaten all week. Only one thought occupied his mind. The generous welcome had to be a trap. Old Wolf suspected that the young baron planned to sell them to slavers or send them into a death mine. Nobody could blame him for thinking that. In this world, a smiling nobleman usually meant that someone poor was about to suffer. Behind the refugees, Red Leaf Cavalry Captain Carl watched the scene from his horse. He loudly mocked the disgraced young lord. Carl reminded everyone that Lorien had been expelled from the capital. Then he asked whether exile had destroyed the baron's judgment. He sneered that Greywood was so poor it had begun collecting another territory's garbage. According to Carl, the refugees did not possess 2 coins between them. Lorien ignored the insult and kept watching the registration line. A far more urgent calculation occupied him. Every unregistered minute increased the chance that another refugee would die. Every dead refugee was 1 silver coin that would never reach his pocket. Time was money, and the clock was ticking. Baller, open those pots before someone dies while staring at them. The order jolted the old butler into motion. Baller obeyed and ordered the cooks to lift every lid. The old man's hands were shaking, but he gave the order. The wooden covers came off all 3 giant iron pots at once. What happened next was a weapon of mass persuasion. A tidal wave of meaty, salty steam rolled across the wasteland and overwhelmed every empty stomach. 3,000 empty stomachs growled at the same time. The combined growl was so loud that Lorien imagined the ground vibrating. The aroma made Old Wolf's injured legs collapse beneath him. Old Wolf's nearly unconscious granddaughter opened her eyes and whispered that she could smell meat. That tiny voice gave Lorien his cue, and he rose in the saddle to address the crowd. Lorien pointed toward the wooden boards and charcoal prepared beside the carts. Greywood was too poor to waste paper on thousands of registrations. Even official territorial records were written on rough planks. Lorien ordered anyone who wanted porridge to join the registration line. Those who could write would add their names to a board. Those who could not write would use a charcoal thumbprint. One clear print was enough for the clerk and the system. The moment it was recorded, the refugee became a legal Greywood citizen. Registration immediately earned that citizen a full bowl of porridge. The process was crude, fast, and perfectly suited to an emergency. Crucially, the population dividend system accepted the crude registration as legally valid. A dirty thumbprint on a plank could therefore create both a citizen and a daily coin. No imperial immigration office could have processed thousands of people faster. Lorien did not care whether they registered with a fingerprint, toe print, or even a face print. Lorien only needed the system to recognize each refugee as one of his citizens. Old Wolf broke first. The old soldier abandoned every instinct warning him to stay away. He hobbled to the front on his injured leg and slammed his blackened thumb onto the wood. The impact nearly cracked the registration plank. He shouted that he would accept the registration first. If his granddaughter received one real meal, Old Wolf considered any hidden danger worthwhile. The instant his charcoal-blackened thumb struck the board, the system chimed. One legal citizen was registered. Current territory population 836. Lorien's eyes ignited with sudden greed. Lorien snatched the ladle, plunged it to the bottom of the pot, and scooped up the thickest, meatiest portion available. He filled the bowl until porridge nearly spilled over its cracked rim. Lorien even selected the largest piece of fatty pork and dropped it into Old Wolf's battered bowl. Lorien praised Old Wolf and ordered him to eat slowly. He warned the old soldier not to choke. Above all, Old Wolf had to remain alive. The urgency in Lorien's voice sounded almost like genuine affection. He regarded the old soldier with more tenderness than he had shown anyone across 2 lifetimes. To Lorien, this was no longer a crippled refugee. Old Wolf was citizen number 836, and therefore precious. Old Wolf stood there holding a steaming bowl, completely frozen. The old soldier looked from the pork to Lorien, who smiled as though greeting a long-lost father. Then he stared at the meat again, still searching for the hidden price. There was no whip, insult, or hidden demand. Only meat offered by a delighted nobleman. Overwhelmed, Old Wolf dropped to his knees as tears crossed his weathered face. Old Wolf fed his granddaughter first, one tiny spoonful at a time, while bowing repeatedly toward Lorien. Through tears, he called Lorien mercy itself. Gareth, the man known as Old Wolf, swore that his life belonged to Greywood's lore. That single act of trust broke the crowd's resistance. 3,000 refugees surged toward the registration tables. Refugees shouted for Lorien to register them next. People pushed forward while claiming they had reached the line first. One man raised his hand and announced a family of 7. Families shouted over one another, demanding that every relative be registered. Everyone suddenly believed that receiving a thumbprint was a matter of life and death. Ding, the system notification rang out. One new citizen was registered. Ding, the system notification rang out. Another new citizen was registered. Ding, the system notification rang out. A third new citizen was registered. The system notifications blended into a rapid, continuous chime. Inside Lorien's head, the sound resembled a slot machine paying out without end. New registrations arrived so quickly that the notifications overlapped. Every thumbprint was a silver coin. Every dirty fingerprint was a daily deposit. Every declaration of citizenship sounded like Lorien's net worth climbing higher. Lorien stood there watching thousands of people stampede toward his registration planks. They fought one another for the privilege of becoming Greywood citizens. His grin stretched so wide he nearly pulled a muscle. Lorien welcomed them inwardly, like a delighted father greeting profitable children. To him, they were beautiful walking money trees. He wanted every last refugee registered. Grandmothers, strange uncles, and distant cousins were all welcome. Babies were especially valuable because they could generate income for decades. A newborn might produce 70 years of silver if Greywood kept the child alive. Porridge vanished from the pots as quickly as cooks could serve it. Charcoal prints covered every available registration plank. The system's chimes continued without pause. Lorien Wisteria, disgraced exile and baron of a mud town, was having the greatest day of his life. Then armor and hoofbeats interrupted Lorien's perfect registration festival. The approaching riders were the last people he wanted to welcome. Captain Karl arrived with 12 armored cavalrymen and the arrogance of a noble bully. With exaggerated sympathy, Karl called the scene touching. Karl mocked Lorien's family disgrace and claimed exile had finally broken the young baron's mind. He gestured with his riding crop toward the refugees devouring porridge behind Lorien. Karl sneered that Lorien was feeding white flour and salted meat to 3,000 human waste producers. He asked whether the disgraced baron imagined himself a saint. The refugees flinched and shrank as soon as they heard Karl's voice. Every refugee recognized the tone of a man who enjoyed abusing the powerless. Karl radiated the unmistakable promise that hurting helpless people amused him. Lorien remained mounted and barely acknowledged the insult. Lorien reminded Karl that he was standing at Greywood's border. Those refugees were now Greywood citizens under Lorien's protection. He warned the cavalry captain to speak about them respectfully. Karl laughed as though Lorien had delivered the funniest joke in the empire. Karl predicted that Lorien's treasury would be empty within 3 days. He claimed the starving citizens would eventually kill Lorien and boil his bones for soup. Karl promised to watch from Red Leaf while Greywood collapsed. Karl's contempt reflected the normal aristocratic view of refugees. To most nobles, refugees meant hunger, disease, violence, and expense. Feeding them appeared indistinguishable from financial suicide. Every nobleman on this continent would have agreed with him. But Karl didn't have a magic system printing money in his brain every morning at 6. He answered Karl with a smile. His smile grew wider and far more unsettling than Karl's. It was the kind of smile that made experienced soldiers uneasy. Lorien answered with a proverb about sparrows never understanding the ambitions of eagles. He had gone full ancient proverb on Karl. Lorien drew a fistful of silver from his coin bag and tossed it lazily in one hand. Clink, 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 the silver gleamed. Every eye on the field immediately followed the moving silver. Karl, his soldiers, and the refugees stared at the coins like moths facing a lantern. Along the impoverished border, silver shone brighter than any beauty. Karl was practically drooling. Lorien casually asked Karl one final question. Lorien squinted at him like a shady businessman about to close a deal. He had heard that another 1,000 or 2,000 refugees remained trapped inside Red Leaf. He specifically meant those too weak to walk. Karl swallowed hard and stared at the coins. The cavalry captain could barely look away from Lorien's silver. Karl admitted that perhaps 1,000 or 2,000 remained. Most were old, sick, half dead, and unable to walk. He expected them to die in roadside ditches before nightfall. Lorien asked why Red Leaf would waste lives that Greywood could still use. The thought made him wince as though someone had destroyed real money. To him, each refugee dying in a ditch was a daily silver coin being buried in mud. He tossed roughly 20 or 30 silver coins at Karl's horse. They scattered in the dirt like the most expensive confetti ever. Lorien called the scattered silver a small payment for Karl's trouble. He ordered Karl to report the offer to the Red Leaf Viscount. Every refugee who was still breathing had to be loaded onto carts and delivered to Greywood. Lorien wanted every one of them, and Karl's jaw dropped. Karl stared in silence while his mind struggled to process the proposal. Lorien had not finished negotiating. Lorien's voice rose as his eyes brightened with another dangerous idea. Lorien proposed turning the exchange into a permanent arrangement. Red Leaf could send him every unwanted refugee, beggar, sick slave, or abandoned laborer. He raised one hand and spread all 5 fingers. The price would be 5 copper coins for each person delivered alive. That became Lorien's standing offer. Dead silence swallowed the entire field. Karl and his cavalry stared as though Lorien had announced plans to marry a goat. The unwanted included the old, the sick, the disabled, and anyone other lords would pay to remove. It resembled offering good money for every unwanted object in a garbage dump. Without Lorien's system, the proposal sounded completely insane. Karl had one defining weakness: greed. The cavalry captain's greed quickly overcame his suspicion. Greedy men rarely ask careful questions while silver lies at their feet. Karl accepted the deal and warned Lorien not to withdraw the offer. Karl nearly fell from his horse as he ordered his men to gather the coins. He promised to deliver 2,000 people by the following sunset. Karl called them garbage, while Lorien regarded them as precious future citizens. The captain mockingly hoped Greywood's treasury would survive the transaction. He rode away laughing, completely convinced he had cheated Lorien. But behind him, 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 was already hyperventilating. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡 asked whether his lord had finally lost all reason. Greywood could barely feed the first 3,000 arrivals. Another 2,000, he warned, might collapse the entire territory. Lorien almost laughed at the word collapse. The registration total inside his mind continued rising like a perfect stock chart. His grin could have scared a demon. Lorien called 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡 a sweet and innocent old man. The butler saw beggars, but Lorien saw another shipment of money printers. Every approaching refugee represented one more daily silver coin. Lorien immediately calculated the value of the expected population. A population of 5,000 meant 5,000 silver coins, or 50 gold coins, each day. That equaled a wealthy viscount's annual income every 24 hours. All Lorien had to do was keep everyone alive until the system paid again at 6 the next morning. Carl believed he was dumping worthless people onto Greywood. Carl was hand-delivering a gold mine, wrapped with a bow, and charging only 5 coppers for each future bar of gold. Carl was the worst negotiator Lorien had encountered on the continent. He was also the best business partner Lorien had ever found. Night brought a new danger because thousands of citizens still slept on frozen ground. The refugees did not complain because their stomachs were finally full. Most had just eaten the best meal of their lives. They rested around the fires with peaceful smiles, unaware that cold could still kill them before dawn. Old Wolf, Lorien's first recruit and favorite silver coin, sat beneath a dead tree with his granddaughter asleep in his arms while keeping night watch. Without being asked, Old Wolf had appointed himself Lorien's personal bodyguard. Old Wolf sat beside the fire, stroking a rusty knife and promising to tear out the throat of anyone who touched Lorien. Lorien marveled that one bowl of porridge had turned Old Wolf into a fanatically loyal bodyguard. Lorien privately decided that one bowl of porridge had produced the greatest employee retention program in history. Inside the wooden shack he generously called a manor, Lorien paced like an expectant father. It was 5:55 in the morning, with 5 minutes until payday. His heartbeat pounded like a drum inside his chest. Nervous waiting had reduced his fingernails to ragged edges. He stared at the clock as though concentration could force it forward. Lorien silently begged the knight not to claim a single refugee. Medieval knights were cold enough to kill healthy people, let alone refugees recovering from starvation. Lorien had ordered 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 to burn every dead tree in town to keep the bonfires alive. His concern came less from kindness than from pure financial anxiety. Every frozen body was a deleted direct deposit. Lorien treated every refugee like a priceless jeweled egg that could not be allowed to crack. One lost life now meant decades of lost revenue. At 5:58, then 5:59, the second hand appeared to slow deliberately. Lorien suspected that the clock was mocking him. Finally, the hour hand, minute hand, and Lorien's entire nervous system aligned. 6 in the morning finally arrived. Ding, the system notification rang out. Daily settlement complete, the system announced. The system reported 4,247 citizens, 835 original residents, and 3,412 refugees. Every newly registered citizen had survived the night. The system deposited 4,247 silver coins into storage. The result sent a burst of triumph through Lorien's entire body. Every nerve seemed to celebrate at once. 4,247 citizens had survived long enough to pay him. He ordered the system to withdraw everything immediately. The withdrawal no longer fit inside an ordinary money bag. Thousands of coins required far more space. A waterfall of silver materialized above the bedroom floor. The coins struck the boards with metallic thunder. All 4,247 pieces poured down in a glittering storm. The crash was loud enough to wake half the camp. Dozens of pounds of silver spread across the room. The mound rose almost half a meter high. It overturned Lorien's small table. Soon the treasure occupied half the bedroom. His sad little shack bedroom resembled a dragon's treasure vault. That single day had produced 42 gold coins and 47 additional silver. A normal border baron would not earn that much in an entire year. Lorien dove face first into the pile, like a storybook miser entering a treasure vault. He buried both hands in the pile and wiggled his fingers through the coins. Silver cascaded between his fingers in cold, glittering streams. Each imperial coin felt impossibly beautiful against his skin. He was rich, genuinely, impossibly rich. For one full minute, Lorien lay among the coins and enjoyed his victory. Then his practical instincts interrupted the celebration. The fortune meant nothing unless he could keep the citizens who produced it alive. He stood up, looked out the window at the pale morning light, and suddenly felt ice cold. The chill came from fear rather than the weather. It was getting colder every day. His people were sleeping outside. Full stomachs meant nothing if his citizens froze to death. A single outbreak of influenza could spread into a full plague. If that happened, his daily income of 4,247 silver coins would vanish almost overnight. This wasn't charity, this was asset protection. Lorien was managing a portfolio made of human lives, and those lives were sleeping in mud. Lorien shouted for Baller to enter the room immediately. The old butler had been sleeping on the porch when the command startled him awake. Baller rushed inside, saw the silver mountain, and froze. The man was staring at a mountain of silver coins that took up half the room. Baller looked as though his eyes might pop from his skull and roll across the floor. Baller asked whether Lorien had somehow mastered legendary alchemy. Lorien ordered him to stop staring and start filling bags. He threw several empty sacks toward the stunned butler. Every available guard was summoned to help move the money. Baller had to ride to Red Leaf City without delay. Lorien ordered him to find the merchants and purchase everything useful. The list included wood, stone, thatch, warm cloth, cold medicine, and winter supplies. Lorien ordered Baller to buy the stores, the warehouses, and every useful supply he could find. Price no longer mattered as much as speed. Baller finally asked why Greywood needed so many building materials. Lorien answered with one word: houses. He needed all 4,000 citizens inside warm, solid buildings before winter arrived. Not a single resident could be left outside. If one citizen died of pneumonia, Lorien would lose an income stream forever. He considered every preventable death a financial loss. Lorien Wisteria did not accept losses. At sunrise, Lorien assembled the entire population and revealed his next impossible promise. Original Greywood peasants stood beside newly registered refugees in the square. The crowd watched him like hungry birds waiting for food. Lorien wore a sharp hunting outfit because history deserved proper presentation. He warned the crowd that winter was approaching. The dramatic announcement sounded familiar, but nobody dared interrupt him. Lorien Wisteria swore that nobody in his territory would freeze to death. Greywood would begin a massive construction project immediately. Hundreds of new houses had to rise before the first deadly snow. Every leaking shack would be demolished and rebuilt from the ground up. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Lorien could practically read their thoughts. Old Wolf's face tightened up. Old Wolf immediately assumed that the hidden price had finally appeared. Old Wolf suspected that Lorien had fed them only to make them work themselves to death. It looked like a classic nobleman move. He was not wrong to think that. Lords in that world routinely forced peasants to work without pay. The practice was forced labor: work until collapse, eat scraps, and die if necessary. No noble was expected to care about the bodies consumed by such labor. That cruelty was treated as ordinary law. Peasants built without pay until their backs broke because nobody with power questioned the system. Every single person in that square had already mentally accepted their fate. The refugees accepted that one magnificent meal might now be repaid with their backs. They prepared themselves for the brutal labor they expected from every noble. They considered the expected bargain harsh but understandable. Forced labor still seemed better than dying beside the road. Then Lorien delivered the part nobody expected. Every adult who helped cut wood, haul stone, or mix mud would be rewarded. Each worker would also receive 3 full meals every day. With his sword raised for dramatic effect, Lorien announced that every participating adult would receive 2 copper coins per day. The announcement produced the mental equivalent of a computer crashing. 4,000 people stared at Lorien in complete, stunned silence. Their shared confusion seemed almost physical. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Only the wind moved through the square. Old Wolf blinked so rapidly that Lorien wondered whether he was having a seizure, while Baller gripped his own beard below the platform. Baller pulled his beard so hard that tears filled his eyes. The butler could not decide whether paying peasants was madness, heresy, or a dream. This wasn't just breaking the law. This was spitting in the face of every tradition, every custom, every ancestor ever lived on this continent. Somewhere in nobleman heaven, 1,000 dead lords rolled over in their marble graves simultaneously. At last, one original Greywood resident raised a trembling hand. One trembling worker asked whether they were truly building houses for themselves. He could not understand why Lorien would feed them and pay them at the same time. Lorien's glare made clear that the promise was not a joke. Lorien announced that 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡 possessed enough money to pay its workers. He ordered everyone to build quickly, solidly, and safely. The wages were small to him, but they could transform a peasant family's life. Exceptional work, he added, might even earn a year-end bonus. Lorien was not generous. He was ruthlessly efficient. Every coin he spent had to protect lives, speed construction, or increase future income. Lorien needed these houses built fast. Winter was breathing down his neck, and dead citizens meant dead income. Without wages, workers would drag their feet, take breaks, and do the minimum. It was classic employee behavior. He had managed people before in his old world. In this world, unpaid workers were slow workers. To people who had never owned money, 2 copper coins felt like a fortune. That tiny wage injected powerful motivation into the entire workforce. Lorien quickly calculated the expense. Paying 4,000 workers 2 coppers each would cost 80 silver coins per day. His daily income from the same population was 4,247 silver coins. He was spending less than 2% of his earnings on wages. In his former world, such a wage ratio would have made Lorien a notoriously exploitative executive. A labor board would have shut his operation down immediately. On this frontier, however, the workers regarded him as a saint. Old Wolf's eyes turned red. They were red with emotion rather than anger. Old Wolf looked like a man discovering that the universe might not be entirely cruel. The realization nearly overwhelmed the old soldier. He clenched his fist so hard his knuckles turned white. He raised one arm and shouted with all the strength remaining in his old soldier's lungs. Old Wolf led the crowd in praising Lord Lorien. He called on everyone to build for their lord and their new homes. The veteran promised to cut 10 trees even if his hands fell off. Long live the Lord. May the light God bless 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡 forever. The roar was deafening. 4,000 people who had resembled walking corpses now shook with energy. Their eyes burned as though they would fight heaven itself for access to a lumberyard. They seized stone axes, wooden shovels, and rusty saws before charging toward the forest. The scene resembled a barbarian raid devoted entirely to construction. Lorien watched the workers charge into the trees and laughed at how 2 copper coins had transformed them. At that pace, the construction schedule suddenly seemed achievable. Elsewhere, wealthy viscounts taxed people into graves for only 50 gold coins a year. Here, he was paying pocket change, being worshipped like a god, and earning a nobleman's annual salary before lunch. Lorien concluded that humane management was extraordinarily profitable. At the quarry, workers attacked the stone with equal intensity. Old Wolf swung his pickaxe through bloodied blisters without slowing. Pete, a broad man with a full beard, hauled child-sized stones while wheezing like a broken accordion. He begged 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡 to slow down before collapsing. Even a mill donkey, Pete argued, received water breaks. Old Wolf told him to stop complaining. He continued striking the rock without even turning toward Pete. His pickaxe struck stone with sharp metallic clangs and showers of sparks. He demanded to know whether Pete had heard Lorien's offer. 2 copper coins changed everything. Old Wolf recalled receiving only foul, stale bread while fighting half ORCs in the army. 2 real copper coins mattered more than Pete seemed to understand. Pete understood the words, but a lifetime of abuse still made the promise feel impossible. Pete wanted to trust the promise, but lifelong abuse warned him that every nobleman's gift concealed a trap. In his experience, nobles never returned money to commoners. A noble who paid wages violated every rule. Pete understood. That rule seemed as permanent as gravity. To Pete, a generous noble made as little sense as cold fire. His experience told him that Lorien's promise could not be real. Old Wolf insisted that Lorien was different because he was a saint. To prove his faith, Old Wolf smashed the pickaxe down hard enough to throw sparks. While debating whether Lorien was a saint, the workers built houses at 3 times the usual speed. The scene only grew more remarkable when sunset arrived. A horn announced payday for thousands of mud-caked workers. Sweaty workers lined up in a queue so long it wrapped around the camp. Old Wolf forced his way to the front, breathing like a broken bellows. After the day's labor, every eye fixed on the copper piles atop Baller's table. Baller adjusted his monocle and scratched his quill across the parchment. The ledger credited Old Wolf with 5 felled trees and 10 loads of stone. Baller placed 2 copper coins into Old Wolf's filthy, bloodied palm. The old soldier stared at the payment in silence. The worn copper discs were cold, heavy, and unmistakably real. The battle-hardened veteran bit both coins to prove that the metal was real. He needed the taste of metal to confirm what his eyes were seeing. His teeth finally convinced his mind that the payment was genuine. The bitter tang of copper hit his tongue, and the man's whole face crumbled. Gareth whispered that the coins were real. Pete received his own wages and stared at them with reverence. Then he dropped to his knees, sobbing as he kissed both copper coins. Mud, tears, and snot did nothing to reduce his gratitude. The camp erupted into a strange celebration as grown men cried and women held copper coins like newborn children. Elderly workers raised copper coins toward the firelight and stared in wonder. Fatigue disappeared beneath the excitement of receiving real wages. Firelight reflected from eyes suddenly bright with hope. Half the workers looked ready to grab torches and keep chopping trees through the night. 2 copper coins per person had created an army of construction fanatics. That tiny wage purchased more motivation than any whip could produce. Greywood resembled a cult devoted to lumber, wages, and aggressive carpentry. But then hoofbeats thundered toward the gate. Carl returned to Greywood's gate with cavalry and another miserable procession. 2,050 refugees staggered forward, coughing and shivering beneath clothing made mostly of holes. He greeted Lorien with exaggerated courtesy. Every word carried obvious sarcasm. He announced that Red Leaf's unwanted survivors had arrived as promised. Roughly 2,050 half-dead refugees trailed behind the cavalry. Carl mockingly wondered whether Greywood could still afford soup for them. The sight of 2,050 additional mouths nearly made Baller collapse. Baller whispered that the territory was finished. Baller believed the new arrivals would eat Greywood into bankruptcy, but Lorien saw only revenue. Lorien regarded the new arrivals the way a starving man might regard an unlimited feast. 2,050 citizens meant 2,050 additional silver coins each day. That increase equaled 20 gold coins and 50 silver coins every morning. Lorien could barely contain his delight. To Lorien, Carl had become a dark angel delivering daily income. He hurled a heavy linen bag at the cavalry captain's horse. It hit the ground with a deeply satisfying thunk. The bag contained 10,250 copper coins, exactly matching the agreed delivery fee. Lorien told Carl to bring every future refugee to Greywood first. He would accept 10,000, 20,000, or even more. Lorien would take them all. Carl opened the bag and found it packed with real coins. His eye twitched in disbelief. Carl looked from the refugees to the payment several times. Nothing in his experience could explain why Lorien valued dying beggars. Carl muttered that Lorien was an absolute lunatic. He predicted the young baron would die, then took the money and rode away, convinced he had cheated a madman. But while Carl rode away celebrating, Lorien turned to his 2,050 new citizens. Lorien ordered Baller to keep the new arrivals warm. The cooks immediately relit the fires beneath the enormous pots. Food and registration had to begin at once. Every thumbprint was a silver coin. Every cough was a cough he needed to cure. Every heartbeat was a transaction pending. Carl believed he had delivered garbage. In reality, he had delivered Greywood's next month of payroll. Cold wind howled outside Lorien's so-called mansion. By mansion, he meant a wooden box that shook whenever he sneezed. Lorien sat at his desk with expensive wine, resembling a financier waiting for a market to open. Sleep was impossible, while another enormous payout approached. Lorien remained awake throughout the night. The system now counted 6,297 people inside Greywood. That total already made Greywood a small city by frontier standards. In a war-torn world where people were scarcer than hygiene, the territory had become a small city. He watched the clock on the wall tick like the world's slowest slot machine. The final seconds crawled past until 6 in the morning. Ding! The system notification rang out. Daily settlement complete, the system announced. Population 6,297. Payout 6,297 silver coins. Lorien ordered an immediate withdrawal of every coin. The next withdrawal resembled neither rain nor a waterfall. It arrived as a violent avalanche of silver. Metallic crashes filled the room before Lorien could move. 6,297 silver coins materialized above his tiny bedroom and came down like a meteor made of money. His wooden table collapsed under the weight. The pile went up to his waist. A stray coin bounced off the mountain and hit him square in the nose. The impact made him see gold-colored stars. The floorboards under him started groaning like a dying whale. The floorboard seemed one coin away from collapsing into the dirt below. Being buried alive in silver would at least have matched his personality. He pulled his legs out of the coin pile like a man escaping quicksand, and did the math, panting. 63 gold coins per day could purchase elite troops or a luxurious capital villa on a daily basis. Lorien was rich beyond anything imaginable. He was genuinely, stupidly, impossibly rich. Then the refugee camp's smell reached him. The stench nearly knocked him backward. A wave of odor rolled through the wall cracks with the force of a biological weapon. 6,000 people had gone years without proper bathing. Many believed soap was witchcraft and bathing invited demons. Human waste covered the ground around sleeping and eating areas. It lay beside homes, kitchens, and crowded pathways. Infected wounds and summer heat made the mixture even more dangerous. The entire camp had become a breeding ground for disease. The smell was so thick that it seemed ready to gain citizenship and start paying rent. With the population above 6,000, the camp had reached the highest possible danger level for disease. One deep breath nearly knocked Lorien unconscious. The odor itself was disgusting, but disease frightened Lorien for more. He feared the epidemic that would inevitably follow such filth. A single epidemic could kill thousands of citizens. That was all it would take to ruin him. One disease crossing the crowded camp could erase 63 gold coins of daily income. Greywood needed sanitation before anything else. Half ORCs were not required to destroy him. Influenza alone could do it. A single outbreak could erase his entire fortune. He kicked his door open, stared into the morning mist, and made a decision that would once again shatter every medieval tradition into a million pieces. Half an hour later, 6,000 citizens stood in the square with full stomachs and confused faces. Lorien announced Greywood's first official sanitation decree. He pinched his nose shut and pointed at the nightmarish landscape of human waste surrounding the camp. Half the construction crews had to stop building houses and begin digging. He demanded 10 sewage pits and public latrines downwind from town as quickly as possible. Anyone relieving themselves outside designated latrines would face punishment. A first offense would cost the offender 1 day's wages. A second offense meant 3 days without meat porridge. Rule 3 was even stricter. Lorien ordered the construction of 4 large public bathhouses. Every citizen would bathe each evening until clean enough to satisfy Lorien. Anyone refusing would lose that day's wages. The crowd erupted into confused chaos. Old Wolf scratched his lice-infested hair and raised his hand with genuine confusion. Old Wolf respectfully argued that defecating on the ground was tradition. His father and grandfather had done the same. Generations had never imagined walking to a separate building for that purpose. Old Wolf complained that forcing everyone to walk to a designated latrine was cruel to their intestines. Lorien answered with the one argument no grandfather could resist. He asked whether Gareth valued tradition more than his granddaughter's life. Lorien asked whether Old Wolf wanted his granddaughter sleeping beside human waste and catching a deadly disease. He demanded to know whether tradition was worth the child's life. Old Wolf's face turned completely white. Old Wolf reversed his position within half a second. He declared that nobody would defecate on the ground again. The old soldier instantly appointed himself chief sanitation enforcer. He made certain the entire crowd understood. Anyone caught outside a latrine would answer directly to Old Wolf. His promised punishment involved a sword handle and far too much detail. Lorien thanked Gareth and stopped him before the punishment became more graphic. Lorien turned to Baller and ordered another purchasing trip. The butler had to return to Redleaf City. He would buy every available bar of soap, bag of salt, jar of cleanser, and bolt of cloth. Greywood could afford high prices, while outbreak of dysentery could cost Lorien everything. Lorien was not building a town. He was building a portfolio. Portfolios require constant maintenance. Lorien's first investment rule was to protect every valuable asset. His second rule was to stop those assets from contaminating their own homes. What Lorien did not know was that news of his spending had already reached Redleaf's merchants. One of those merchants was Hobby, a round, shrewd man who could sense profit from miles away. His cart carried poor beer and moldy linen behind an exhausted horse. Hobby's cart driver had complained throughout the journey. The driver asked Hobby whether visiting a camp of 6,000 starving refugees was wise. The driver warned that the refugees might consume every remaining supply. He feared the refugees would devour them for a single piece of bread. Hobby insulted the driver and dismissed every warning. He slapped his round belly and grinned at the possibility of profit. Greywood's butler had spent dozens of gold coins in Redleaf only 1 day earlier. Rumor claimed he had purchased half the market. Hobby followed gold wherever it appeared. He would have entered a latrine in hell for sufficient profit. When their cart reached the hilltop, the sight of Greywood left both men speechless. They saw no corpses, plague, or collapse. Instead, thousands of ragged but energetic citizens hauled logs, carried stone, sang work songs, and raised new walls. The whole place looked like an anthill whose workers had been given performance-enhancing drugs. Then 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖 noticed the strangest sight. Hundreds of people were digging enormous pits downwind. They lined the pits with stone, as though building the most important structures in history. The driver invoked the light god in shock. He wondered whether the workers were digging mass graves. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖 corrected him with open contempt. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖 stared so intensely that his eyes seemed ready to leave his face. He explained that Greywood was building sewers and public latrines for peasants. The merchant sat frozen on his cart while he tried to understand the scene. Even wealthy dukes rarely provided proper latrines for ordinary citizens. Yet Lorien was building clean public facilities for refugees. In the middle of nowhere, Lorien walked out to meet them, with 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖 hobbling behind him, arms spread like a salesman greeting his favorite customer. Lorien welcomed the merchant to Greywood's rising miracle. At the same time, he scanned 𝗥𝗘𝗡𝗖𝗡's cart like a living inventory clerk. The load contained some cloth and perhaps a little soap. It was useful, but nowhere near enough. 𝗥𝗘𝗡𝗖𝗡 climbed from the cart wearing his most dishonest salesman's smile. 𝗥𝗘𝗡𝗖𝗡 introduced himself with extravagant politeness. He claimed to carry fine linen and drinkable beer. When price entered the conversation, his fingers began rubbing together. Lorien cut through the performance and demanded exact quantities. Bandits and dangerous roads did not interest him. He asked how much rough cloth 𝗥𝗘𝗡𝗖𝗡 possessed. Soap, winter coats, and blankets mattered even more. 𝗥𝗘𝗡𝗖𝗡's instincts immediately recognized an unusually wealthy customer. The merchant smelled Lorien's urgency and immediately prepared to exploit it. 𝗥𝗘𝗡𝗖𝗡 decided to demand the highest price his courage allowed. 𝗥𝗘𝗡𝗖𝗡 claimed to have 500 bolts of cloth and 1,000 bars of soap. For the entire load, he hesitantly proposed a price. The amount was at least 30 gold coins. He blamed bandits, damaged supply routes, and dangerous roads for charging triple the goods' real value. The little con artist expected Lorien to protest the threefold markup. Lorien did not even blink. He snapped his fingers at 𝗥𝗘𝗓. 𝗥𝗓 staggered forward with a sack heavy enough to injure his back, then opened it. 3,000 silver coins hit the mud at 𝗥𝗘𝗡𝗖𝗡's feet like a shiny landslide. The silver formed a shining mound against 𝗥𝗘𝗡𝗖𝗡's boots. Lorien calmly explained that the silver pile equaled 30 gold coins. He told 𝗥𝗘𝗡𝗖𝗡 to count it, then added another 10 gold coins as a deposit. 𝗥𝗘𝗡𝗖𝗡's knees failed, and he dropped into the mud beside the money. When 𝗥𝗘𝗡𝗖𝗡 finally spoke, his voice trembled. He asked what Lorien wanted in exchange for the additional 10 gold deposit. Lorien crouched and patted the merchant's round cheek. 𝗥𝗘𝗡𝗖𝗡 had to return to Red Leaf City immediately. Lorien first told him to inform his guild. Then he expanded the order to every merchant in the city. Greywood wanted all available soap, cloth, salt, medicine, and winter supplies. 𝗥𝗘𝗡𝗖𝗡 was to strip every useful shelf bare. The goods had to be loaded onto carts and delivered without delay. Lorien leaned in close. The same dangerous excitement had returned to Lorien's eyes. He ordered 𝗥𝗘𝗡𝗖𝗡 to announce that Greywood would purchase survival supplies at premium prices without limit. There would be no spending cap and no upper ceiling. Every full cart would be exchanged for a cartload of silver. 𝗥𝗘𝗡𝗖𝗡 could bring anything useful, and Lorien would buy it. The merchant hugged silver to his chest and cried without dignity. He called Lorien the god of wealth, walking among mortals. 𝗥𝗘𝗡𝗖𝗡 promised to sell even his own underwear if necessary. He swore he would return with everything. He scrambled onto his cart and whipped that sad horse into the fastest gallop of its miserable life, disappearing down the road in a cloud of mud and greed. 𝗥𝗘𝗓 watched him leave, wringing his hands. The nervous butler asked whether Greywood was spending money too quickly. Lorien checked the health panel in his system. The new shelters and sanitation work had already improved population health. Disease risk had fallen sharply, and the system projected no immediate deaths. For the moment, every registered citizen was expected to survive. The system now guaranteed 6,297 silver coins every morning at 6. Lorien placed a reassuring hand on 𝗥𝗓𝗓's bony shoulder. He called the butler his sweet old friend. Lorien promised that 𝗥𝗓𝗓 would someday understand the joy of earning gold without labor. He was spending money like water, and everyone thought he was insane. The secret was simple. Lorien's financial faucet refilled faster than his expenses could drain it. Every coin spent on soap or blankets ensured 63 gold coins of daily income. Every toilet formed another defensive wall against plague. Every warm coat increased the chance that his citizens survived winter. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 believed his 300% markup had cheated Lorien. In reality, 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏's citizens returned more than 4,000% simply by breathing. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 was not the successful scammer in that transaction. Lorien was. He was scamming the entire medieval economic system. At 5:59 the following morning, Lorien sat alone in his room. He calmly spun a steel dagger at his new oak desk like a theatrical villain. This time there was no pacing or nail-biting. He no longer stared at the clock like a desperate lunatic. Lorien simply waited for the familiar chime. The system reported a population of 6,301 after 4 births. The new total produced 6,301 silver coins. 4 babies had joined his payroll by doing nothing except being born. Lorien considered them his most efficient new employees. No formal training was required. Their duties were simple: cry, breathe, grow, and generate 1 daily silver coin for decades. The numbers pleased Lorien completely. He closed his eyes and peered into the system's storage. A massive hoard of silver glowed inside storage like a dragon's treasure. For once, Lorien resisted the urge to withdraw everything like a deranged goblin. Money was wonderful, he admitted, but wealth without protection invited robbery. A fortune without a strong sword was merely an invitation to thieves. Then a dangerous reality interrupted his satisfaction. Lorien had publicly sent carts of silver into Red Leaf City and purchased entire sections of the market. He had also tipped cavalry officers and reduced experienced merchants to tears of joy. Lorien was supposed to be a broke, disgraced exile who had left the capital with only the clothes on his back. Any reasonably observant person would begin asking questions. People would inevitably ask where the money came from. A disgraced man whose family had been ruined should not possess more cash than a duke. If the Red Leaf Viscount learned the truth, an invasion could begin within days. If the same news reached the capital, Lorien's old enemies would react even faster. His old enemies would send an army to finish the destruction of his family. Greywood would be flattened, and his 6,000 precious money generators would be scattered or slaughtered. Lorien resembled a piglet rolling in gold, while wolves gathered around it. Continuing to display his wealth openly would be suicidal. He withdrew just 50 silver coins, pocket change, and knocked on his desk. He called 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 into the office. The old man shuffled in, instinctively ducking and shielding his head as he crossed the doorway. He was fully expecting another silver avalanche to come crashing from the ceiling. The quiet room confused 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏, who had expected another avalanche of silver. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 entered and asked why Lorien had summoned him. Lorien rose, approached 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏, and adopted a serious expression. This time Lorien's seriousness was genuine. There were no wild eyes, screams, or flying coins. He admitted that 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 had probably wondered where the money originated. The old man flinched as though Lorien had jabbed him with a sword. The butler insisted that a servant should never question his master. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 added that even gold obtained through a demonic bargain would not erase Lorien's kindness. Lorien told him to relax and listen carefully. He placed one hand on the butler's shoulder. Then he adopted the tragic expression of a suffering nobleman. The performance deserved an award. Lorien claimed that the fortune was his mother's final gift. Surprised, 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 repeated the reference to Lorien's mother. Lorien lowered his voice into a dramatic whisper. His fictional story gave his mother ties to the most powerful merchant family in the South. Before exile, she had supposedly hidden her life savings inside a spatial ring for him. The story was a complete fabrication. Not a single part of it was true. Spatial magic was rare but real, which made the lie believable. That made the spatial ring explanation an ideal cover story. A wealthy mother secretly protecting an exiled son sounded perfectly plausible. Anyone hearing the story would accept it without question, and Lorien watched 𝗥𝗘𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 to see whether the lie had worked. Lorien then added the most important part of the deception. He claimed the hidden fortune was finite. Every coin spent, he warned, disappeared forever. That entire explanation was a lie. In truth, the system refilled his wealth every morning at 6. Lorien asked what would happen if Red Leaf or another nearby lord discovered the fortune. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 turned pale at the implication. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 understood frontier politics far better than Lorien did. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 warned that neighboring lords would descend on Greywood like jackals smelling blood. They would invent an excuse to invade and rob the territory clean. Lorien nodded, because 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 had reached exactly the intended conclusion. Here was the plan. The reckless public displays of wealth had to stop. They could no longer dump mountains of fresh silver at merchants' feet. Greywood had to reduce its visible spending. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗥𝗡𝗔𝗧𝗘𝗏 would locate Hobby and quietly purchase his cooperation. A few coins would persuade the merchant to spread a false explanation. The rumor would claim Lorien had sold his mother's only high-level magic amulet for emergency cash. According to the story, even that money was almost gone, and Greywood was barely surviving. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗥𝗡𝗔𝗧𝗘𝗏 immediately understood the value of the cover story. The plan was both simple and convincing. From now on, they would stop using shiny new silver coins for purchases. Purchases would be routed through the black market. Fresh system silver would be exchanged for worn copper and chipped old coins. Different merchants would handle each order. Small shipments and changing routes would hide the territory's true spending. Greywood needed to appear poor. Every nearby lord had to believe Lorien was bankrupting himself to feed refugees. No outsider could know that Greywood was quietly becoming healthier, wealthier, and more loyal. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗥𝗡𝗔𝗧𝗘𝗏 nodded so quickly that Lorien feared the old man might injure his neck. The old man finally understood the game. Lorien walked to the window and studied the waking settlement. Cooking fires were already sending smoke into the morning sky. Hammers and saws echoed across the expanding settlement. Citizens built homes and ate breakfast without knowing how valuable their lives had become. Lorien's expression became cold as he considered the territory's next weakness. Lorien could hide the money, but Greywood still needed teeth. He ran his thumb along the edge of his dagger. Those teeth needed sharpening. Because he was the region's richest man pretending to be its poorest. He had a gold mine that grew legs and built its own houses. Lorien had loyalty so intense that Old Wolf would bite someone's throat out for him over a bowl of porridge. None of that loyalty mattered if a viscount arrived with 50 trained knights. Money could purchase food. It could also purchase stronger buildings. Money could buy soap, sanitation, and merchant loyalty. It could not stop a sword by itself. Phase 1, becoming rich, was complete. Phase 2, becoming dangerous, had begun. At lunch, the porridge bubbled as usual. That day, however, Lorien intended to build something more important than houses. He sent out a new order. Construction work was suspended for the day. Every able-bodied man between 15 and 40 received a summons. They were ordered to report to the East Field. Soon, 1,500 nervous men stood waiting for an explanation. Pete stood near the back, trembling with anxiety. Pete whispered to Old Wolf and asked what was happening. Pete nervously asked whether Lorien was preparing to expel them. He had only just become accustomed to eating every day. He had also begun enjoying the unfamiliar feeling of earning money. Returning to the wilderness now seemed worse than death. Old Wolf ordered Pete to stop spreading panic. The veteran silenced every nearby doubter with a glare. Even the veteran was sweating as he watched from below the platform. Lorien appeared in black leather armor instead of his usual noble clothing. A sword hung at his hip, and every trace of humor had vanished. He intended to frighten the crowd before giving them hope. Lorien began with a simple question for the men of Greywood. He asked whether they had eaten well during the previous days. He also asked whether their families had slept warmly. The crowd praised the Lord who had saved them. 1,500 grateful voices answered like a physical wall. The answer satisfied Lorien. Then Lorien let his smile fall away. His second question was far less comforting. Did they believe they could eat white bread and collect wages forever in a world where dogs fought over scraps? The field became completely silent. Lorien reported that Red Leaf cavalry had been circling Greywood's borders. Bandits were also gathering in the surrounding wilderness. The smell of Greywood's meat porridge had attracted every predator nearby. Lorien allowed the danger to settle over the crowd before continuing. Those enemies would steal the food, burn the houses, and sell women and children into slavery. The warning silenced even the most confident men. Breathing grew heavier as fists tightened and eyes filled with anger. People who have escaped years of suffering become dangerous when someone threatens to drag them back. These men were not yet soldiers. They were starving nobodies who just tasted dignity for the first time, and the thought of losing it made them completely feral. Old Wolf exploded out of the crowd like a cannonball. Old Wolf shouted that the enemy should come. He promised to tear out their throats with his teeth if necessary. Lorien loved the old soldier's unrestrained loyalty. Old Wolf remained both his favorite citizen and his favorite psychopath. Their desperation was exactly what Lorien needed. He was ready to turn that fear into military loyalty. Lorien pointed toward Gareth and ordered him forward. He appointed the veteran captain of Greywood's new militia. The force would be called the Iron Guard. At his signal, several tarp-covered carts rolled onto the field. Lorien paused until every eye had fixed on the hidden cargo. He ripped the tarps off. Sunlight flashed across hundreds of iron spears, swords, and thick leather armor sets arranged in precise rows. The weapons lacked decoration, but every edge was sharp. The plain iron edges carried a simple promise: they would cut through flesh like butter. Baller had secretly purchased the weapons in small batches from different sellers, leaving no paper trail. In medieval law, peasants owning weapons was about as legal as a fish riding a bicycle. One fact mattered more. Laws, Lorien reflected, were written by people who controlled armies. He was about to have an army. He called for 500 volunteers, unafraid of death. Lorien drew his sword and pointed it at the sky. The dramatic gesture never failed to command attention. Lorien invited the bravest men to join the Iron Guard. Members would no longer haul rocks for construction. Their wage would rise to 5 copper coins per day. They would receive meat at every meal. Their families would receive first priority for completed houses. In return, they had to place their bodies between Greywood and every enemy. Anyone willing to risk death could step forward and claim a weapon. Old Wolf did not hesitate for even a heartbeat. Old Wolf charged onto the platform, seized an iron broadsword with both trembling hands, and dropped to one knee. Old Wolf raised the sword and swore that his blade belonged to Lorien. Pete charged up behind him, seized a spear, and demanded a place in the new guard. Pete swore that he would never return to starvation. He demanded a place beside Old Wolf in the Iron Guard. Other men offered to sign away their lives for the same chance. The volunteers surged toward the waiting weapons. They crowded the carts like bargain hunters at a market sale, seizing weapons and shouting loyalty oaths. None of the volunteers possessed formal military training. They were former refugees who had received food, wages, and purpose for the first time. They were willing to kill rather than lose their food, wages, and purpose. Within 30 minutes, all 500 equipment sets had been claimed. Not one weapon or armor set remained unclaimed. Lorien looked down at his new army. Its formation was poor, its discipline weak, and its training non-existent. Yet their eyes belonged to wolves that had tasted meat and learned someone wanted to steal the next meal. No amount of money could purchase that particular hunger. Formal training could not create it either. It came from men who remembered starvation and preferred death in battle to returning there. He named them the Iron Guard. 500 former nobodies now stood armed, fed, paid, and eager for violence. They were insanely loyal to Greywood. Their total daily cost was 25 silver coins. That expense consumed less than 0.5% of Lorien's daily income. He had purchased a private army for the cost of an excellent dinner. Anyone who wanted to touch his 6,000 daily silver coins would have to face the Iron Guard. Any attacker would face 500 well-fed men prepared to fight with terrifying enthusiasm. Lorien's human portfolio finally possessed security. The dragon guarding Greywood had grown teeth. Lorien silently invited his enemies to test them. 30 miles away, a one-eyed psychopath named Bloodblade Baron occupied a filthy pine forest. He sat on a log, polishing a battered sword that looked better suited to chopping firewood. This charming gentleman was the biggest bandit boss in the region. 300 killers followed him. They included deserters, failed mercenaries, and wanted murderers. Their favorite activities were stabbing, theft, and more stabbing. Soon, a thin, rat-faced scout hurried from the forest camp with exciting news. He had bribed a stable boy employed by the Gold and Rose Merchant Guild. The information concerned the exiled Baron Lorien. According to the rumor, Lorien had sold his mother's magic amulet for a fortune. The stolen information mentioned thousands of silver coins, and perhaps even gold. Unfortunately, Lorien's carefully planted cover story had produced the wrong impression. Hobby had successfully spread the rumor, but listeners remembered only the fortune. Instead of hearing that Lorien was nearly bankrupt, criminals heard that he had recently possessed thousands of silver coins. A simple rumor had become dangerously distorted during its journey. The false story now made Greywood appear both wealthy and vulnerable. The excited scout then revealed an even more tempting detail. Lorien was supposedly feeding 6,000 refugees every day. He served white flour porridge with pork while maintaining almost no visible security. He claimed Greywood had no knights, no trained soldiers, and only skeletal peasants. One lieutenant, a huge man with a face like bruised meat, listened eagerly. The lieutenant burst out laughing. He laughed and asked whether Lorien was operating a charity. To the bandits, Greywood held 6,000 helpless victims, mountains of food, and no army. They considered the town a gift from the light god. In their heads, the math was simple. Their calculation placed 300 experienced killers against 6,000 supposedly unarmed peasants. They planned to sell the young women to slave traders. The men would be forced into labor. Children and elderly residents would be killed to save food. It was the standard business model of medieval banditry. The plan was monstrous, but ordinary for that world. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 stood, sheathed his chipped sword, and grinned through one good eye. He forbade his followers from drinking before the raid. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔 ordered his men to move after dark. The bandit chief wanted Lorien captured alive. Only the baron could reveal where Greywood's fortune was hidden. Everyone else who resisted would be killed. The bandits intended to seize every storehouse. They also intended to enslave Greywood's women. He promised his followers a feast in Greywood that night. Killing, theft, and meat filled the bandits' thoughts. 300 bandits howled like hyenas that had discovered a wounded animal. They moved through the darkness toward Greywood like a cloud of filth. At the same time, Lorien faced an entirely different crisis. He was inside his office when Balor arrived with terrible news. He approached Lorien as cautiously as a servant delivering bad news to a dragon. A sewer trench had collapsed during construction the previous day. 2 workers had suffered severe injuries. Despite the healers' efforts, one had died 30 minutes earlier. Lorien's expression darkened immediately. Another registered citizen had disappeared from the system forever. Lorien cared that the worker had died, but his grief was inseparable from the permanent loss of future income. Lorien felt genuine anger, but the permanent financial loss sharpened it. The dead worker had been a lifelong source of passive income. 1 silver coin per day, 365 per year for decades. That revenue stream had now closed permanently. Lorien demanded an immediate report on the second injured worker. He ordered Balor to use the most expensive medicine available. Whether the worker ever walked again did not matter. Even permanent confinement to a bed was acceptable. As long as the man breathed, Lorien would feed him into old age. A living disabled citizen was infinitely more valuable than a healthy corpse. The second worker had to survive at any cost. Balor bowed and promised to obey. Sweat covered Balor's forehead as he promised to save the remaining worker. Then an alarm horn sounded outside. This was not a harmless signal. It was not the horn used to announce dinner. Its sound made every listener's blood run cold. The emergency sentries posted along the outer fence were sounding the highest alarm. An enemy attack was already underway. Sentries shouted that bandits were attacking. Lorien's hand reached his sword before his thoughts caught up. 300 armed raiders were advancing toward his town. The raiders threatened his food, his citizens, and his entire investment. They threatened his people, food, and 6,000 daily silver coins. Lorien almost pitied 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 for choosing the wrong target. The one-eyed bandit had made a fatal mistake. He expected to raid a defenseless refugee camp. He did not know that Lorien had armed 500 men who preferred battle to losing their first wages. 300 hyenas were approaching a settlement filled with newly fed wolves. Lorien anticipated the confrontation with grim satisfaction. At midnight, torches flickered along Greywood's perimeter. 300 idiots were about to have the worst night of their lives. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 rode up on a horse so skinny it looked embarrassed, squinted his one good eye at his wooden fence, and laughed. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗏 ordered his men to charge and burn Greywood to the ground. 300 screaming bandits surged from the darkness, expecting terrified farmers to collapse before them. The attackers expected Greywood's residents to kneel and beg. Instead, the first sound Lorien heard was deeply satisfying. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Dozens of hand-sharpened javelins flew from concealed trenches and pierced the leading bandits. A dozen attackers fell before they understood what had struck them. Blood sprayed across Greywood's wooden defenses. Screams tore through the night. The raiders finally understood that they had entered a trap. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏's remaining eye widened. The raid was nothing like easy slaughter he had imagined. The defenders had only begun their response. Behind the fence, iron spear points rose through the darkness like the teeth of a great beast. The Iron Guard raised its spears in disciplined formation. Old Wolf stood at the front in leather armor, his bloodshot eyes glowing beneath the torchlight. He resembled a rabid animal that had been given a sword and told biting was also acceptable. The bandit chief knew nothing about Greywood's recent transformation. When the alarm sounded, 500 Iron Guard soldiers had just finished a late-night meal. Lorien had approved extra food for night patrols because well-fed soldiers fought better. These soldiers were Lorien's investment protection. Each guard looked back at the sleeping camp where his family and unfinished home waited. That camp contained their first warm meals, wages, dignity, and security. Before them stood men determined to take everything away. Not one man stepped back. Old Wolf raised his broadsword and roared like a possessed beast. Old Wolf reminded the militia that Lorien had given them life. Their lord had also restored their dignity. Now, bandits had come to steal their bread and destroy their homes. That threat transformed fear into murderous determination. Old Wolf reminded the militia that retreat would return their families to starvation. Lorien had promised 2 silver coins for every raider captured or killed. The reward turned every enemy into a valuable battlefield target. The price was high, but permanently removing raiders was worth it. Watching his soldiers fight like players in a loot-driven game was worth every coin. The Iron Guard answered with a roar and charged. 500 former peasants surged forward like berserkers, strengthened by food and fury. They had received almost no formal training. Most could not distinguish a proper parry from a dance step. They knew almost nothing about formal night combat. They did possess sharpened iron, full stomachs, and desperate courage. Their courage came from remembering absolute poverty and refusing to return to it. Pete had always been nervous and cautious. Pete locked eyes with a huge bandit climbing over the fence. The attacking bandit was twice his size and built like a wall. Pete neither dodged nor flinched. He drove his iron spear through the attacker's stomach and forced him backward into the mud. Pete screamed that nobody would touch his porridge. Even after the bandit fell dead, Pete did not stop. Even after the bandit stopped moving, Pete stabbed several more times to make certain the threat was gone. Across the battlefield, Greywood's unexpected resistance became a nightmare for the raiders. Mud, blood, screams, and broken weapons covered the ground. Bloodblade Baron's hardened killers were being destroyed by former farmers with iron weapons and murderous resolve. The surviving bandits stumbled in shock. The raiders could not accept that these defenders were former peasants. The bandits are red-eyed fanatics with superior weapons, who kept fighting even while bleeding, and then chased them into the dark. They had expected helpless refugees rather than disciplined fanatics. Bloodblade Baron watched his men fall like wheat beneath a hailstorm, and at last, his single useful thought appeared. The surviving bandits broke formation and screamed for retreat because Greywood's defenders fought like real soldiers. Retreat became impossible when Lorien and several mounted guards struck the bandits' flank. The maneuver closed their escape route like a steel door. Lorien saw several fallen Iron Guard soldiers among the bandit corpses, and his fury became personal. Every fallen Iron Guard soldier represented a daily silver coin that Lorien would never receive again. Those dead citizens were golden geese slaughtered by worthless thieves. A precise mixture of grief and financial rage hardened Lorien's expression. The loss had become both personal and economic. Lorien ordered the Iron Guard to keep Bloodblade Baron alive. He wanted the location of the bandits' stolen treasure. Raising his sword, he spoke with the coldness of a frozen lake. No other raider was to survive. The Iron Guard received permission to cut the remaining bandits apart. Lorien condemned the filthy dogs for killing Greywood's brave defenders. He ordered his soldiers to make every attacker regret entering the world. Bloodblade Baron had come to rob Greywood. He had targeted Lorien's food, people, and daily income. That combination made mercy impossible. 300 hyenas had challenged 500 wolves, defending the first decent lives they had known. It was the worst business decision of Bloodblade Baron's rapidly ending life. The fight was over by 4 in the morning. Lorien checked the battlefield scoreboard. More than 260 bandits lay dead in the mud. About 30 survivors, including Bloodblade Baron, had their ankle tendons cut and were tied to posts in the square. The air smelled like a butcher shop that exploded. 6,000 citizens watched in torchlight, their hatred unsettling even experienced executioners. Old Wolf limped toward Lorien. A deep gash exposed bone in Old Wolf's arm, and blood dripped from his fingers. Despite the wound, he stood at attention like a soldier on parade. Old Wolf reported that Greywood had won. The Iron Guard held the line. Not one bandit made it into camp. Old Wolf dropped to one knee before his lord. Then his voice cracked. Then the veteran reported that 15 Iron Guard soldiers had died. 8 additional soldiers had suffered serious wounds. The number struck Lorien with the force of a hammer. 15 deaths meant 15 fewer silver coins every morning forever. The annual loss equaled 5,475 silver coins. The bandits had stolen more than lives. They had ripped decades of future revenue from Lorien's system. To him, their attack was more than murder. It was financial terrorism. Lorien stormed toward Bloodblade Baron, who remained tied to a post. The prisoner sweated from pain and the realization that his career had ended catastrophically. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 tried to address Lorien politely while blood ran down his face. One look into Lorien's eyes erased the last of the bandit chief's courage. The broken bandit chief attempted to surrender. He offered a noble ransom in exchange for his life. He also claimed to know the location of hidden treasure inside Red Leaf. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 promised he could become more valuable alive than dead. Lorien seized the prisoner's greasy hair and forced him to meet his eyes. He reminded the bandit chief that surrender had come too late. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 had killed 15 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗔𝗧𝗘𝗗 citizens. Those deaths represented decades of stolen income. Even Red Leaf Castle would not cover the amount Lorien believed he was owed. Before he could beg again, a blade hissed through the air and stopped at his throat. The execution was quick, clean, and final. Blood sprayed across Lorien's formal clothing. Lorien did not flinch. He kicked the bandit chief's body away from the post. Greywood's new noble tradition was simple. Anyone who harmed Lorien's people forfeited the right to mercy. King or commoner, the punishment was death. The crowd shouted praise for their lord. More than 6,000 citizens answered with a deafening roar. Their roar shook the blood-covered square. They had just watched a nobleman execute a bandit chief to avenge common laborers. Such a scene was almost impossible in their world. In their experience, nobles ignored peasant deaths. A lord did not grieve for commoners. A lord certainly did not take personal revenge for them. Lorien had become more than a generous employer in their eyes. He had become the center of their faith and loyalty. Lorien handed his bloody sword to a guard, rubbed his temples, and didn't go to bed. Sleep remained impossible after the battle. Lorien dragged a chair into the blood-soaked square and sat among the dead. Nobody dared approach him. His expression promised death to anyone foolish enough to interrupt. Even scavenging wolves kept their distance. He sat among the dead, surrounded by blood and torch smoke, while calculating the damage. The construction accident and battle had killed 16 citizens in total. 16 permanent entries had vanished from his daily income. The final minutes crawled painfully, slowly. The sky slowly turned from black to gray to pale gold. Then dawn arrived at 6 in the morning. Ding, the system notification finally rang. Daily settlement complete, the system announced. The system recorded 16 deaths during the previous day. 1 came from the construction accident and 15 from battle. Greywood's registered population had fallen to 6,285. The new payout was 6,285 silver coins. He breathed in the cold morning air and let it burn his lungs. The reduced number repeated inside Lorien's mind. His income remained enormous, but part of it had been cut away forever. His shoulders dropped for the first time in 12 hours. The iron knot in his chest finally loosened. 16 daily coins were gone forever. The loss hurt, and every future payout would preserve the memory. Every future payout would remind Lorien of the citizens 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 had taken. But the core portfolio survived. 6,285 loyal citizens remained alive, fed, housed, and defended. Sitting in the blood-stained square, Lorien allowed a cold capitalist smile to return. The bandits came for his gold and got slaughtered. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 had gambled his life against Greywood's defenses and lost. The next morning would still bring another mountain of silver. The morning after that would bring another, and the system would continue printing. Greywood's human portfolio would keep growing. Every bandit, lord, and knight within 100 miles would soon hear what happened. Anyone touching Greywood would face a baron willing to answer before breakfast with a bloody sword. The battle carried a brutal cost. 16 lost lives could never be recovered. Lorien learned a painful lesson. Greywood needed more soldiers, stronger walls, and sharper defenses. The lesson had been expensive, but Lorien learned quickly. Baller asked what should be done with the roughly 30 surviving bandits. The butler regarded the prisoners like cockroaches wearing human skin. Execution by hanging or beheading would have been the ordinary answer. Both punishments were standard throughout the region. One option required rope, the other required a sword. Either choice ended with corpses. Nobody present expected another outcome. Then Lorien studied the trembling, wounded prisoners and discovered a more profitable possibility. The possibility raised a dangerous question. The system awarded 1 silver coin each day for every legally registered living citizen in Lorien's territory. The surviving bandits were legally enslaved prisoners. A dangerous question struck him. Would enslaved prisoners count as registered citizens? Any ordinary lord would have executed them without hesitation. They were violent, dangerous, and expensive to feed. Most rulers believed they could produce nothing except trouble. Execution therefore appeared obvious. Lorien was not an ordinary lord. He was the kind of man who would register a stray dog if the system rewarded it. Lorien called for the registration ledger. Lorien told Baller to bring the ledger and a charcoal pen. Baller scrambled to fetch the ledger. Baller returned with parchment and charcoal. Lorien approached the nearest bandit, whose teeth chattered violently, and pointed to the page. Lorien ordered the nearest prisoner to press his thumb onto the page. The captive bandit cautiously asked whether he was now Lorien's prisoner. The terrified man wondered whether he was signing a confession. He agreed to sign anything that might save his life. The prisoner begged Lorien not to kill him. He slammed his bloody thumb onto the parchment hard enough to nearly tear it. The prisoner's tears and panic left him barely able to stand. Lorien held his breath and watched the system. After 2 tense seconds, a notification chimed. The system recognized one legally enslaved citizen. Current population 6,286. Lorien swore aloud as delighted disbelief broke through his composure. Baller flinched at the outburst, while the prisoners stared in confusion. The notification transformed Lorien's anger into immediate calculation. The experiment had worked. Enslaved prisoners counted. Bandit slaves could generate the same daily revenue as free citizens. Each murderer tied to the posts was now worth 1 silver coin per day. That income would continue for as long as the prisoner remained alive. Lorien slowly turned toward the 33 surviving prisoners. His fury vanished and was replaced by a warm smile more frightening than anger. Execution was no longer the profitable choice. Lorien reassured Baller that he had not suddenly become sentimental. Publicly, Lorien announced that 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗥𝗡𝗔𝗧𝗘𝗗 practiced mercy. He even dusted dirt from one prisoner's shoulder like a gracious host. He publicly invoked the light god's teaching about giving lost souls a chance at redemption. The surviving bandits froze in terror. The prisoners' fear shifted into disbelief when they realized Lorien might spare them. Hope appeared on faces that had expected execution only moments earlier. Lorien almost pitied the fools for misunderstanding what came next. He summoned Pete, who came sprinting over with the enthusiasm of a loyal hound. Pete was ordered to register every surviving bandit. Each prisoner would receive lifetime slave status. The prisoners' sudden hope began to disappear. Their instincts correctly warned that mercy had a price. Lorien's voice turned cold as he announced the sentence. An iron fence would be built around the quarry behind the mountain. 20 iron guard soldiers would guard the quarry at all times. The prisoners would perform 𝗥𝗚𝗜𝗏's most dangerous and disgusting labor. They would receive only 1 meal per day. That meal would be thin mush mixed with sawdust. The ration would keep them alive without wasting valuable food. Anyone who slowed down would face a salt-soaked whip. The bandits' faces shifted from hope to despair within seconds. The speed of that emotional collapse was almost amusing. Within seconds, every prisoner understood the cruelty of the arrangement. Lorien leaned toward the nearest captive with an angelic smile. Lorien told the nearest prisoner to be grateful. 𝗥𝗚𝗏 had given him a reason to remain alive. He would now work in the quarry until every trace of usefulness left his body. As long as he breathed, he would generate wealth for the territory. The economics of the arrangement were magnificent. Feeding 1 slave cost less than half a copper coin per day. The ration was garbage that even a starving rat might reject. Each slave produced 1 silver coin, equal to 100 coppers. Each enslaved bandit offered a return approaching 20,000%. No legitimate business in Lorien's former world could match it. They would clean sewers, split dangerous rock, and perform backbreaking transport work. Those jobs would otherwise require paying citizens 5 copper coins per day. Now, the same work would be done by the men who had attacked 𝗥𝗚𝗏𝗏. Baller watched from behind Lorien with his mouth open, unable to classify what he was witnessing. The butler's expression revealed every confused thought. Traditional nobles simply hanged captured bandits. The process was quick, simple, and final. Lorien publicly preached mercy at every opportunity, yet he had discovered a punishment far more ruthless than execution. His pleasant smile made the sentence even more terrifying. Once again, disaster had become a business opportunity. Those 15 dead soldiers still stung. Their crimes would always leave scars. 33 new slaves would generate 33 daily silver coins while performing unpaid labor. His mind was already racing toward the real revelation. Every future bandit, enemy soldier, prisoner of war, or violent criminal could be treated the same way. They were no longer immediate threats. They were future revenue walking directly toward Lorien's registration ledger. Every attacking enemy could become another silver coin in his pocket. The prisoners had not yet understood their new financial value. The more enemies attacked Greywood, the richer victory could make him. An attack by 100 men could produce 100 new slaves. Those captives would generate 100 silver coins every day. That amounted to 3,000 silver coins in a month. Lorien regarded every failed attack as an involuntary donation. He had accidentally created the most perverse military incentive in the history of economics. He wanted people to attack him. As long as the armed and fanatically motivated Iron Guard kept winning, each battle became a recruitment drive. Baller looked at him sideways as they walked back to the manor. Baller asked whether his lord truly considered that outcome merciful. Despite the question, Baller wore an enormous grin. He declared that the light god must be proud of Lorien. Behind them, guards dragged 33 sobbing lifetime laborers toward the quarry. The prisoners would remain profitable until their bodies finally failed. Lorien hummed cheerfully while returning to his office. Cruel efficiency had never felt so satisfying. The next morning, Greywood woke to the clang of hammers and anvils. In Lorien's territory, that sound meant progress. On the east side of town, 12 new clay furnaces poured smoke into the sky. Instead of purchasing finished tools forever, Lorien had chosen to build local production. A foolish lord would have continued buying finished tools at inflated market prices. Lorien went to Red Leaf City's black market, overpaid 5 veteran blacksmiths and their apprentices, and bought a mountain of cheap raw iron. Owning the workshop was more profitable than repeatedly buying axes. By morning, 2,000 new iron tools waited in the square. Pickaxes, axes, shovels, and hoes gleamed with dark iron. Old Wolf held one new axe with the reverence normally reserved for a holy relic. To Greywood's workers, the new iron tools seemed like a divine gift delivered without cost. In that world, iron was a luxury. A peasant family owning one rusty sickle would pass it through generations like a precious jewel. Greywood citizens had been working with sticks, sharpened stones, and crude bone hoes. They had attempted to build a town with Stone Age technology. Lorien had just delivered the Iron Age on a silver platter. 2,000 iron tools now belonged to Greywood. Baller handed Old Wolf a new axe while wearing an equally dreamy expression. Even the old butler struggled to believe the tools were real. He explained that Lorien considered stone tools far too slow. In Greywood, time was life. The new tools could help them complete 10 houses in a day. Baller warned Old Wolf not to disappoint their lord. Old Wolf took a deep breath, raised that iron axe over his head, and slammed it into a thick pine log. Crack. The new axe split the log. The blade sank deep into the wood like a hot knife through warm butter. Wood chips flew everywhere. One clean strike accomplished what several blows from a stone axe could not. A stone blade would have left only a pale scratch. The difference in efficiency was impossible to ignore. One worker shouted in amazement that cutting wood now felt like slicing butter. A younger man hugged his iron shovel as though it were his beloved. He claimed the tool could dig an entire moat within one day. The workers roared that they would labor for Lorien. Old Wolf howled, and the newly equipped construction crew stampeded into the forest with terrifying enthusiasm. From the hilltop, Lorien watched trees begin falling 3 times faster. Output immediately tripled across the worksite. Tasks that once consumed a day now required only a few hours. The sound of iron hitting wood echoed across the landscape like a symphony of productivity. Baller stood behind him, physically wincing at the expense. Baller reminded Lorien that 2,000 iron tools had cost 500 gold coins. The amount made the butler physically ill. Lorien dismissed 500 gold as a temporary expense. He told Baller that the old man was still thinking too small. It was already late autumn. Winter would arrive in roughly 1 month. Snow would close the mountain passes and kill the trade roads. No caravans or merchants could reach Greywood afterward. A room full of silver could not buy grain that physically could not arrive. Baller's face turned white as the danger became clear. Baller asked whether Lorien intended Greywood to produce its own food. Purchasing grain was only a temporary bandage. Farming was the permanent cure. Lorien pointed at the massive stretches of wild, untouched land surrounding the town. Within weeks, Lorien wanted the houses finished, the wasteland plowed, winter wheat planted, and windbreak greenhouses built. If even one of his 6,000 citizens starved or froze that winter, his daily revenue would permanently fall. Each winter death would be both a human tragedy and a permanent financial loss. Lorien finished the calculation with a satisfied nod. 500 gold sounded enormous, but it represented less than 8 days of system income. That made the tool investment cheap compared with losing citizens throughout winter. If the tools prevented even a fraction of those deaths, they would repay themselves many times over. He would forge shovels himself if doing so kept the population stable. At that moment, a guard sprinted up the hill while gasping for breath. A guard reported that a merchant caravan had reached the gates. The caravan was not carrying food. It belonged to the Black Crow Slave Trading Company from Red Leaf City. A convoy of slave traders had arrived at Greywood's gate. Lorien's eyes brightened as though someone had announced a sale on future citizens. He immediately decided to inspect the available captives. Some of those unregistered lives might become profitable additions to Greywood. In Lorien's world, every heartbeat was a daily deposit. Slaves, refugees, bandits, and babies all generated the same reward. Lorien privately decided that anything he could register and keep breathing belonged in his system. Some fool had driven a cart full of unregistered heartbeats directly to his door. To Lorien, the caravan resembled an unexpected sale on future income. Lorien approached the caravan with the excitement of a determined shopper. Several large cage carts rolled to a stop before him. Large iron cage carts reeked of blood and misery, while a sweaty trader controlled the convoy. The man greeted Lorien like a dealer welcoming his favorite customer. He claimed to have heard about Greywood's rapid construction. Then he offered obedient and disposable laborers for sale. Lorien approached the cages and nearly gagged at the smell. The cages held bankrupt farmers, battered laborers, and several captured ORCs. It was the ordinary human trafficking inventory of that brutal world. Every captive appeared thin, injured, and close to death. Lorien did the math in his head instantly. Most of these men would not survive until 6 tomorrow morning. If they died before the system payout, they were practically worth negative money. He would be paying for corpses. Lorien rejected the weakest captives because their survival prospects were too poor. He waved his hand and started to walk away. The Black Crow trader stopped him and announced that one final captive remained. According to the trader, the final prisoner was unusual. The trader hurried to a final cart covered by black cloth and pulled the cover away. A woman sat inside the cage, wearing torn linen robes beneath wild silver hair. Even dirt and exhaustion could not hide her striking face. The sight of her stopped Lorien for a moment. Her pointed ears revealed half-elf blood, while her emerald eyes announced that she considered everyone present an idiot. The trader warned that she could neither build houses nor plow fields. Lorien raised an eyebrow. The Black Crow trader leaned closer and explained in a conspiratorial whisper. Her name was Alara. She had been a senior plant science scholar at the Violet Magic Academy before being expelled and enslaved because of her half-elf blood. She had also published writings the church called heretical. Lorien asked what the supposed heresy had claimed. The church accused her of insulting the doctrine of the light god. Alara answered Lorien with the coldest glare he had ever received from behind prison bars. Even in chains, she carried more dignity than many kings. She spoke with the confidence of a lecturer rather than the fear of a prisoner. Alara proved in a peer-reviewed paper that composting human and animal waste at high temperatures could increase wheat yields by over 200%. Her paper attacked priests who prayed over barren soil instead of improving it. Every guard around him recoiled. Baller started making crosses on his chest so fast his hand was blurring. The surrounding guards recoiled at the idea of spreading filth across food crops. Baller immediately suspected demonic possession. To the medieval mind, crops grew through divine generosity, and excrement represented absolute impurity. Combining the two sounded as absurd as claiming that licking an electrical outlet cured disease. To the witnesses, Alara's research sounded both insane and blasphemous. Lorien, however, stood completely still. Revelation rather than disgust had frozen him. His mind calculated the implications immediately. Greywood produced enormous quantities of human and animal waste. Properly heated compost could potentially double crop yields. Greywood already contained more than 6,000 residents. All of them ate daily, which meant all of them produced valuable organic waste. What went in eventually had to come out. Lorien had been desperately trying to dispose of mountains of organic waste. The toilets and sewers had solved sanitation while creating a huge waste management problem. Alara was now explaining that his greatest sanitation burden could become his greatest agricultural resource. The sewage was not merely waste. The waste was free fertilizer, produced in industrial quantities as a daily byproduct of keeping 6,000 citizens alive. Everyone else saw a dangerous heretic obsessed with filth. Lorien saw an agricultural genius capable of transforming Greywood. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 possessed knowledge that could revolutionize food production across the territory. With her knowledge, he wouldn't just feed 6,000 people. Her methods could feed 60,000 people, perhaps even 600,000. His territory could become the breadbasket of the entire continent. Every new person Lorien fed would produce another silver coin each day. She was the missing piece in Lorien's expansion plan. Her research could transform his profitable town into a sustainable empire. Lorien immediately asked the price of the scholar. Lorien's voice trembled like that of a man making an important proposal. The fat slave trader misread his stuttering as disgust and got nervous. The slave trader warned that the half-elf scholar was considered a troublesome heretic. She also had a beautiful face. The trader asked 5 gold coins and offered several healthy laborers as part of the package. Lorien answered by hurling a heavy money bag against the trader's chest. The impact forced the slave trader backward and nearly dropped him into the mud. The bag contained 1,000 silver coins. Lorien offered 10 gold coins immediately. The amount was twice the trader's asking price. Lorien did not attempt to lower the price. Lorien showed no hesitation before doubling the slave trader's demand. Every moment 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 remained caged delayed Greywood's agricultural revolution. Lorien ordered the cage opened at once. The trader's eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. He fumbled with the keys, hands shaking, probably wondering if he should have asked for more. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 stared through the bars, defiant and suspicious of whatever fate Lorien intended. She could not yet understand why his excitement had nothing to do with her beauty. Lorien had no intention of sending her to his bed. He also had no intention of wasting her in an ordinary field. Her destination was an office. Lorien announced the decision to everyone nearby with a manic grin. He introduced 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 as Greywood's new chief agricultural officer. The guards, the trader, and 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔 herself stared as though Lorien had lost his mind. The package also included 32 healthier laborers from the neighboring cage. Baller registered 𝗥𝗘𝗓𝗏 and all 32 laborers before the caravan departed. Those 33 registered captives raised Greywood's population from 6,319 to 6,352. The witnesses still saw a condemned heretic where Lorien saw the future of food production. Greywood already possessed soldiers, builders, iron tools, and an expanding labor force. 𝗥𝗘𝗓𝗏 supplied the knowledge capable of turning the territory's waste into food. Her appointment completed the foundation of Lorien's agricultural expansion plan. His population machine had just received a major upgrade. But that evening 𝗥𝗘𝗓𝗏 sat across from the one man who had just bought her freedom. A plate of hot roasted lamb chops and white bread was steaming in front of her. She didn't touch it. She only stared at him with eyes sharp enough to cut steel. Lorien told her to eat because the food was not poison. He was busy sketching a land development map on cheap parchment. He barely looked up from the map. 𝗥𝗘𝗓𝗏 coldly asked what the Baron wanted from her. Her voice was cold as a mountain stream. She was both beautiful and terrifying. She warned that any attempt to use her as a nobleman's plaything would end badly. Her threat involved biting through Lorien's throat. Given 𝗥𝗘𝗓𝗏's experience with nobles, the threat was understandable. In that world, an attractive half-elf slave usually faced exploitation, abuse, or death. 𝗥𝗘𝗓𝗏 had clearly prepared herself for the worst. Lorien told 𝗥𝗘𝗓𝗏 that her body did not interest him. He continued studying the map instead of her appearance. More precisely, he had no interest in physical transactions that produced no surplus value. He had rejected a beautiful half-elf using the language of economics. Economics governed Lorien's priorities. Tapping the map, Lorien asked the only question that mattered. Could her composting method make 2,000 acres of winter wheat sprout before frost? The offer stopped 𝗥𝗘𝗓𝗏 halfway through her murderous glare. For the first time, surprise replaced her hostility. She asked whether Lorien considered the research blasphemous. She could not believe that he felt no disgust. Lorien replied that hunger was the real sin. Poverty, he added, was the true filth. He dismissed her concern with a snort. Manure, forbidden magic, or dragon droppings were all acceptable if they produced grain. Lorien wanted results rather than excuses. Grain fed people, and people generated prosperity. He nearly said profit, but corrected himself in time. If 𝗥𝗘𝗓𝗏 could grow food, every sewage pit in Greywood would be placed under her control. She would receive complete creative authority. Something changed in her eyes. For the first time, that icy armor cracked. She'd spent her entire academic career being mocked, expelled, and imprisoned for her research. Every scholar called her crazy. The church called her a heretic. The academy threw her out. Now, a supposedly bankrupt border baron was telling Alara that her forbidden agricultural research sounded brilliant. Lorien offered her an entire department, but Alara refused to surrender her caution. Suspicion returned before she could accept. Alara warned him that implementing her method would cost a fortune. Proper composting required specialized fermentation pits, controlled heat, and trained workers. She explained that clearing wasteland required tools. Premium winter wheat seed also had to be purchased from major cities. The full project would require hundreds of gold coins. An exiled border baron should not possess that amount. She insisted that Lorien could not possibly afford the project. The clock showed 5:58, then 5:59. Lorien asked her to wait 1 minute before judging his resources. Lorien stood up, cracked his neck, and checked his system panel. Population after yesterday's slave purchase, 6,352. The final seconds passed, and the clock reached 6. The familiar daily settlement notification chimed. The system completed its new calculation. Population 6,352. Payout 6,352 silver coins. He faced Alara with the smile of a man about to destroy her understanding of reality. When Alara repeated that the work required hundreds of gold coins, Lorien activated the system withdrawal. Then the air split above the dining table, and a tsunami of silver poured down as though heaven had overturned a house-sized bucket. Thousands of silver coins crashed onto the table and floor in a blinding waterfall. The overloaded table groaned beneath the silver. Coins overflowed the table and piled around Alara's feet until she stood ankle-deep in silver. The noise was unreal, like being inside a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Alara's knife and fork clattered to the ground. Alara's mouth fell open in complete disbelief. Her normally composed emerald eyes widened. Every trace of scholarly superiority vanished. For once, Alara had no clever response. Alara demanded an explanation for the impossible display. She asked what kind of spatial magic could produce so much silver. Then she asked whether Lorien had robbed the imperial treasury. Her questions rose into a shout. The calm scholar finally lost her composure. The woman who had calmly defied the church suffered a complete breakdown over the silver avalanche. He picked up a fistful of coins casually like grabbing popcorn, and dropped them onto her plate. Coins landed across her untouched lamb chops with a sharp metallic clatter. Lorien told her to forget the light god for 1 moment. Inside that room, money was the only religion relevant to the project. The floor held tens of thousands of silver coins, worth hundreds of gold. Lorien described the fortune as only a few days of pocket change. Lorien moved closer across the silver-covered floor. Meeting her eyes, he described the position with absolute conviction. Alara was appointed head of 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔 Department of Agriculture and Infrastructure Development. Her budget would be effectively unlimited, and any required workers would be provided. Additional money would appear whenever the project needed it. Lorien wanted Alara's condemned research applied across every field in 𝗥𝗚𝗜𝗏. Her composting methods would cover the territory. Every usable acre had to produce food. Alara stood knee-deep in silver and stared as though Lorien came from another dimension. Then Alara's expression changed. Suspicion and exhaustion gave way to astonished hope. A fierce light appeared in her green eyes. The emotion was not romantic attraction. It was the joy of a scientist whose life's work had finally received belief, authority, and funding. She lifted her skirt clear of the coins and performed a formal scholar's bow. The gesture was graceful enough for a queen accepting a crown. Alara accepted the appointment with a steady voice that barely concealed her academic obsession. Alara promised to turn 𝗥𝗚𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔 into the most fertile farmland on the continent. That was how Lorien hired a genius. Respect for her research opened the door to her loyalty. The enormous budget removed every remaining objection. The total recruitment cost was 10 gold coins and 1 dramatic silver avalanche, while the expected return was enormous. Her agricultural revolution could eventually feed 60,000, 600,000, or even 1 million people. Every future citizen would generate another daily silver coin. A compost scientist and a money-obsessed baron had formed an extraordinary partnership. It promised to become the most profitable alliance in 𝗥𝗚𝗜𝗏's history. Soon 𝗥𝗚𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔 produced a smell powerful enough to qualify as a final enemy. Alara stood beside enormous pools of fermented human waste. She stirred the dark sludge with a pole, while observing it with scientific delight. The fermentation temperature had reached the desired level. Heat had destroyed parasites and dangerous eggs. She turned toward 2,000 farmers standing about 50 feet away. Every worker pinched a nose and stared as though 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 had asked them to eat spiders. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 demanded that they begin working. The compost had to be loaded into wheelbarrows and spread across 2,000 cleared acres. Winter wheat had to enter the soil before the first frost. For several seconds, nobody in the crowd moved. Not even Old Wolf volunteered immediately. Old Wolf, bless his loyal heart, forced himself to step forward. The workers protested that they were not lazy. They were simply being ordered to handle human waste. They feared that placing such filth into sacred soil would destroy every crop. The terrified farmers predicted plague and divine punishment. Many believed the light god would punish the entire town. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 regarded the refusal as proof of widespread ignorance. Anger made her entire body tremble. She described the compost as premium nitrogen-rich fertilizer. Proper use, she insisted, would produce wheat stalks as thick as thumbs. She demanded that they choose between a trained scientist and greedy church officials. The accusation made the already nervous farmers even more uncomfortable. The farmers shifted uneasily. They looked at one another and then toward the compost pits. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏's furious glare offered no comfort. Still, nobody approached the black fertilizer. Not one worker was willing to touch it. 2,000 workers faced one furious half-elf, and the compost dispute was somehow defeating them all. Medieval superstition had defeated science for the moment. Then Lorien arrived to change the calculation. He rode a black horse and wore a bearskin coat, determined to look impressive during a speech about compost. Lorien walked to the edge of the cesspit and deliberately inhaled. He immediately regretted taking such a deep breath. His stomach tried to launch his dinner through his nostrils. The smell was so powerful, it felt like being punched in the face by a fist made of sewage. Every instinct told Lorien to retreat, but he swallowed his disgust and kept his face expressionless. The watching workers waited to see whether their lord would recoil. Lorien refused to weaken his authority by gagging in front of them. Lorien drew his sword, pointed at the compost pool, and declared the substance sacred rather than cursed. He challenged anyone who dared call the substance unholy. His shout snapped 2,000 workers to attention. Elsewhere, the material might have been dismissed as waste. Inside Greywood, Lorien declared it a sacred gift from the light god. He named the compost Holy Harvest Soil, leaving 𝗥𝗘𝗏𝗏 both impressed and horrified. She watched him transform fermented waste into a religious blessing through nothing but confident language. Lorien considered the performance necessary. The farmers would never be persuaded by logic alone. 𝗥𝗘𝗏𝗏's decade of research had already proved that facts were insufficient. 10 years of 𝗥𝗘𝗏𝗏's research papers had not worked. One tactic always worked in medieval society. Lorien combined divine language with the cash bonus. He asked whether the workers wanted white bread throughout winter. He asked whether their children should continue chewing tree bark through winter. The workers shouted that they understood Lorien's command. Old Wolf answered with immediate, red-eyed enthusiasm. He ordered every shovel of holy harvest soil spread across the farmland. Not one drop was to remain in the pits. He snapped his fingers. Lorien summoned Baller to read the new decree. The old butler arrived, carrying a large wooden box, and shouted the terms. The team hauling the most compost would receive an extra half-pound of salted pork that evening. For every 10 full cartloads, each worker would earn 1 extra copper coin. The offer combined extra meat with extra wages. The first workers finally pushed their shovels into the manure. Everyone could see superstition collapse beneath immediate economic need. Fear of demons suddenly mattered less than food. The threat of plague could not compete with an immediate reward. Even angering the light god seemed like a problem for another day. Meat and money were available now. The workers surged forward before anyone else could claim the reward. The first squad seized the first cart. Old Wolf transformed into a fanatical compost collector. Old Wolf attacked the cesspit with his shovel as though it contained diamonds. Other teams accused him of cheating. The second squad charged in and scraped the bottom of the pit. Nobody intended to leave even a speck behind. Pete even removed his shirt and wrapped it around a wheelbarrow so precious sewage could not leak during transport. The man was protecting human waste like it was liquid gold. Within 10 minutes, 2,000 grown men were fighting over shovels and competing to collect the most waste. They shoved and shouted, while greed nearly turned the work into a riot. 𝗥𝗘𝗏𝗏 stood aside and watched her entire worldview collapse. 𝗥𝗘𝗏𝗏 had spent a decade writing papers, delivering lectures, and begging scholars to respect compost science. Alara had been mocked, stripped of rank, and enslaved for defending the same science Lorien had just made popular in minutes. After inventing a religious title and offering a few pennies, Lorien leaned toward Alara and asked whether she understood the crowd now. Lorien explained that faith failed where profit succeeded. He explained that enough meat and money could make those men polish a cesspit cleaner than a dinner plate. Alara looked from the workers fighting over manure back to Lorien. At that moment, she realized her employer was not merely a lunatic. She'd been hired by something far more dangerous. He understood that economics defeated theology whenever people were starving. Lorien officially branded the product Holy Harvest Soil. He jokingly declared the name patent pending. According to him, all commercial rights were reserved. Lorien advertised it as entirely organic fertilizer produced from local waste. The fertilizer was headed toward 2,000 acres of Greywood farmland. Elsewhere in Greywood, dawn approached another group of reluctant workers. Behind the mountain, the prison quarry was already waking. While Lorien waited comfortably for payday, 34 enslaved bandits woke inside a freezing labor camp. The captives' so-called new life meant freezing days spent smashing boulders until their arms failed. Scarface Kyle, one of Bloodblade Baron's former lieutenants, was curled up in a windbreak shed, shivering in rags so thin they were little more than suggestions of clothing. 2 weeks earlier, Kyle had charged Greywood shouting about killing, stealing, and meat. Kyle was now branded property with a pickaxe and no meaningful career options. Greywood regarded him as a lifetime laborer and daily source of silver. Based on 15 years of bandit experience, Kyle estimated that he had about 2 weeks to live. That was a normal survival estimate for prisoner slaves in this world. Most lords worked captives to death, fed them garbage, and beat them daily. The feudal system treated prisoners as disposable. Execution through labor was the medieval equivalent of a shredder. At dawn, Iron Guard soldiers ordered the prisoners awake. Sunrise meant another day in the quarry. The guards struck the fence with iron weapons. Kyle dragged himself upright and prepared for a whip. Instead, soldiers entered carrying 2 large wooden buckets. They set the buckets down with heavy thuds. The guards announced that Lord Lorien had shown mercy. Because the temperature had fallen dangerously low, the prisoners received extra rations. Each captive would receive 1 bowl of hot oat mush. The announcement left the prisoners speechless. Kyle's brain stopped working. He shuffled into the line, hands shaking, and received his bowl. It was hot, genuinely hot. Steam rose from the bowl and warmed Kyle's frozen fingers. The food itself was cheap black oat mush. Its appearance was unpleasant, but the warmth mattered more than flavor. It tasted like wet sand. Still, the bowl contained no rocks. It also contained no wood chips. Nothing hidden inside threatened to break a prisoner's teeth. For a former bandit who had survived on roadside carrion, even warm, edible food felt miraculous. To Kyle, the meal deserved the highest praise imaginable. The important fact was that it arrived hot. The bandit next to Kyle was inhaling his portion while openly weeping. Several prisoners suspected that the unexpected kindness meant a final meal. The former bandits wondered whether Greywood planned to execute them. Nobody in Kyle's criminal life had treated him with such basic care. After eating, the guards ordered everyone back to the rock face. They shouted that the command came directly from Lorien. Anyone avoiding work would be thrown into a sewage pit the following day. Kyle licked his bowl completely clean. He refused to leave even a speck behind. Then he picked up his iron pickaxe and walked toward the cliff wall. During the walk to the quarry, the veteran criminal experienced a startling realization. Kyle realized that life as a bandit had always been miserable. Every day on the road was pure terror. A bandit never knew where the next meal would come from. Soldiers hunted them constantly and treated each severed head as a promotion. One mistake could leave a corpse in a ditch with crows feeding on it. The quarry work was undeniably brutal. Slavery was brutal and freedom was gone, but Greywood provided hot food and a heated shelter. Rumors about the new heated greenhouses suggested that even winter might not kill them. Kyle shouted that freedom could wait, then swung his pickaxe with the fury of a man who had discovered job security. Kyle had no intention of leaving. Lorien declared that Kyle would smash rocks in the quarry until the day he died. His pickaxe threw sparks as it cracked the stone. He worked harder than many paid citizens. Regular meals had transformed him into an enthusiastic, survival-fueled laborer. Food had motivated him more effectively than chains. But inside his office, the clock finally reached 6. The system ledger showed 29 additional births and late registrations since the previous settlement. Population 6,381, including 34 lifetime slaves. Payout 6,381 silver coins. Lorien took a sip of warm milk and smiled. Lorien then reviewed the economics of his new prison labor operation. 34 bandits remained registered and alive. Daily food cost less than 2 copper coins total. That labor was nearly free. The cost was so small that Lorien spent more on table linens. 34 slaves produced 34 silver coins, or 3,400 coppers, each day. They also produced high-quality building stone without wages. They worked with enthusiasm because the alternative was starving in a ditch. The arrangement combined almost no wages, minimal food costs, maximum output, and grateful workers. Lorien considered it the perfect financial product. It outperformed stocks, bonds, and property while also performing manual labor. While stroking his chin, Lorien considered an idea that would have made any ordinary noble summon an exorcist. He needed to figure out how to lure more bandits into attacking Greywood. The implications were obvious. Every attacking bandit either died as a threat or survived as a profitable captive. Enemies delivered themselves to Greywood, already motivated by violence and ready for processing. Other lords prayed that bandits avoided their territories. Lorien instead considered ways to attract more raiders. A successful raid invitation could become a recruitment campaign. Greywood could appear rich, weak, and full of food. Lorien even imagined posting invitations along the highway. Other nobles would have assumed that demonic possession explained such thoughts. They would have been wrong. He was possessed by something far more dangerous. Compound interest was the true force possessing Lorien. Meanwhile, Greywood had become genuinely impressive. The town no longer looked good only when compared with a garbage dump. Its improvement was obvious by any reasonable standard. The transformed streets made visitors struggle to believe that Greywood had once been a mud pit. Hundreds of neat wooden houses now stood in orderly rows. They were not palaces, but their thick thatched roofs blocked wind and snow. Every wall crack was sealed with windproof clay. Nobody was sleeping in the dirt anymore. 2,000 acres of winter wheat had been planted with Alara scientifically prepared compost. Behind the town rose structures that seemed centuries ahead of their surroundings. Dozens of makeshift greenhouses used oiled canvas and underground channels connected to fire pits. Medieval workers had built an entire heated greenhouse network. In a world that feared bathing, the achievement almost made Lorien cry. Winter was already closing around Greywood. The wind now carried the sharp bite of approaching snow. The first snow could arrive at any time, and one final shopping campaign remained. As though summoned, an enormous merchant caravan entered through the gates. This was nothing like Hobby's miserable two-cart operation. Mars's convoy represented a true regional trading power. Dozens of wagons and armed guards traveled beneath the Golden Eagle banner. The Golden Eagle belonged to the largest trading company in the region. Their leader was Mars, a bald merchant with a watermelon-sized belly and silk robes worth more than old Greywood. Mars sat inside a luxurious carriage like a merchant king. His assistant had briefed him on the way. His assistant reported that Lorien supposedly possessed emergency cash from selling a family amulet. Greywood's refugees desperately needed winter supplies. One merchant asked Mars whether they should double their prices. Mars laughed at the suggestion of merely doubling prices. He called that markup amateurish. Snow was approaching, and Greywood appeared trapped. The supplies would determine whether thousands lived or froze. Mars ordered prices increased fivefold. He believed Lorien would either pay or watch his citizens die. From the merchant's perspective, Greywood had no alternative. It was classic price gouging dressed as commerce. Then Mars stepped down from his carriage and watched his plan collide with reality. Greywood contained no reeking mud pits or skeletal refugees. The roads were paved with crushed stone. Houses stood in neat lines. In the distance, thousands of well-fed, rosy-cheeked workers were building the strange greenhouses with genuine enthusiasm. The most alarming sight for Mars waited at the center of town. At the center of town, 500 armored Iron Guard soldiers stood in perfect formation. Their cold expressions belonged to men who had recently killed and were prepared to kill again. Mars's hired mercenaries instinctively tightened their grips on their weapons. Even the professional killers looked nervous. That reaction proved how frightening Greywood's army had become. Lorien could almost hear Mars's plans collapsing inside his head. Mars had expected a bankrupt exiles refugee camp. The settlement looked less like a refugee camp and more like a military base with excellent nutrition. Lorien welcomed manager Mars to Greywood. Lorien strolled out, surrounded by his iron guard, smiling pleasantly. Mars swallowed so hard his entire neck rippled. The arrogance evaporated like morning dew. The merchant immediately replaced arrogance with smiles and bows. Mars invoked the light god and bowed deeply. He announced that the Gold Eagle Company had brought 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗥𝗡𝗜𝗓 winter supplies. The order included 300 grain carts, 2,000 sheepskin coats, and 1,000 pounds of salt. While facing 500 spears, Mars reconsidered his planned five-fold markup. Lorien told him to save every excuse. He snapped his fingers. Baller arrived with workers pushing 4 heavily loaded wheelbarrows. When they removed the covers, 4 mountains of silver appeared. 40,000 coins glittered beneath the pale winter sun like a dragon's fever dream. 400 gold coins worth of raw silver sat openly in Greywood Square. Mars's heart stuttered inside his chest. Lorien watched the merchant struggle to remain composed. Mars's left eye twitched. For 1 second, he appeared to stop breathing. The physical mountain of money overwhelmed his commercial instincts. This man had been in the trading business his entire life and had never seen this much cash in one place. In this world, major transactions were settled through promissory notes and guild credit. Almost nobody transported 40,000 physical coins for a commercial purchase. Doing so, less like trade and more like calculated insanity. Lorien offered the full 400 gold in silver immediately. He leaned close and lowered his voice. Normal market prices did not interest him. The money would purchase every item Mars had brought. That included grain, coats, salt, wagons, and even the horses. Mars's calculating mind finally began working again. He had originally planned to charge 5 times the normal price. Lorien's offer exceeded Mars's most outrageous planned markup by 20%. The merchant was being overpaid for abandoning his own scam. Lorien had defeated an attempted scam by offering even more than the dishonest price. But the offer included even more. Lorien patted his stiff shoulder. Lorien explained that the money also served as a down payment. He wanted an exclusive supply contract with the Gold Eagle Company. His expression warned that the contract would be unusually ambitious. Greywood's next challenge was acquiring fuel and resources at scale. Lorien's demand could either terrify a merchant or make him kneel. He did not care how Mars obtained the goods. Mars could search other cities. He could even travel into the ORC borderlands. Lorien wanted slaves, refugees, and raw iron. He also wanted animals capable of breeding. Any useful living animal was acceptable. If Mars could deliver something useful to Greywood, Lorien would buy it. The offer had no expiration date. Lorien asked whether Mars understood the scale of the contract. Mars looked between the silver and Lorien while performing frantic calculations. Then his knees buckled and he hit the ground like a bag of expensive silk. His considerable body shook with financial ecstasy. Mars bowed and praised Lorien more extravagantly than necessary. Mars declared the Gold Eagle Trading Company Lorien's servant. He even compared himself to an obedient dog. The dog, he added, expected excellent compensation. The exclusive contract was settled. Lorien had added another frightened merchant to his growing network. With Hobby handling small purchases, Carl delivering refugees, and Mars managing major supplies, Lorien was building a powerful logistics network. Lorien watched the caravan unload grain, salt, and sheepskin coats into Greywood's warehouses. The exclusive supply agreement took effect immediately. Greywood now had 6,000 citizens fed, housed, heated, and clothed. It also possessed greenhouses, fertile fields, an army, a scientist, loyal merchants, and a quarry of captive laborers. Winter could now arrive without finding Greywood unprepared. 10 feet of snow would not change the calculation. Even a solid freeze could no longer destroy the territory overnight. Lorien's population machine had been insulated and winterized. More than 6,000 silver coins would still arrive every morning. Blizzard, frost, and darkness could not interrupt the system. When spring reopened, the roads, neighboring territories would still be recovering. Greywood would emerge with full granaries, fertile fields, a trained army, and overwhelming wealth. The surrounding world was completely unprepared for Greywood's rise. The result combined medieval capitalism, infrastructure obsession, and unlimited system funding. Greywood was about to change from an unknown mud town into a place capable of making empires nervous. Everything had begun with one expensive boot landing in Donkey Waste. In mid-November, the first blizzard struck, like a train made of frozen knives. Wind screamed while snow fell sideways. Across the continent, such storms carried the grim nickname Death's Knock. Every year, the first major snowstorm quietly killed hundreds or thousands of peasants in neighboring territories. Peasants went to sleep beneath leaking roofs and often never woke. Their lords counted the bodies, updated the census, and moved on. That was considered an ordinary medieval winter. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏, Residents, however, met at the storm without panic. Lorien had spent too much money to allow winter its usual victims. Lorien's town had prepared for the storm. Inside House 37, a middle-aged peasant woman named Martha woke from a nightmare. She dreamed her old straw roof collapsed under the snow, and she and her son froze to death in the mud. The nightmare reopened memories of every deadly winter she had survived. That nightmare had been her reality for decades. In her panic, she shouted for her son Pete to wake. She warned him that sleeping through the cold meant death. The nightmare convinced her that the old freezing shack had returned. Martha grabbed at imaginary straw and tried to cover Pete. She entered full panic mode. Then she opened her eyes and found no wind, leaking roof, or falling snow. She was lying on a real wooden bed. Dry hay and clean linen covered the bed beneath a sheepskin coat heavy enough to insulate a small house. Even wealthy red leaf merchants would have considered such a coat luxurious. A genuine stone fireplace crackled in the center of the room. Black pine logs filled the sealed, draft-proof cabin with almost excessive heat. Her son Pete, now an Iron Guard veteran, sat beside the fire. He casually roasted a palm-sized slab of salted pork on an iron skewer. Fat hissed into the flames while the entire cabin filled with the smell of roasting pork. To the family, that single dish felt incredible. Martha woke and asked Pete why he was still awake. Relief overwhelmed Martha, and tears began pouring down her face. Pete's mother touched the new sheepskin coat and asked whether she was dreaming. Martha remembered winters when her family could not even afford dried cow dung for fuel. She asked where the coat, meat, and firewood had come from. Pete reminded his mother about Lorien's winter distribution. Every household had received sheepskin coats and firewood. The Lord had taken nothing from them in return. Even while construction stopped for the storm, Iron Guard wages continued. Pete explained that the coat was their reward for helping build 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 house. Pete handed her roasted pork wrapped in soft white bread. His eyes gained the intense devotion common among Lorien's followers. The expression stood only one step away from religious worship. Pete reminded Martha of Lorien's recent speech in the square. He imitated the Lord's arrogant yet strangely protective voice. He reminded her that Lorien had ordered everyone to remain indoors during snow days. Lorien had jokingly ordered bored couples to spend the storm making babies. Lorien had even declared that more children would bring greater prosperity to 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏. Pete insisted that he had repeated the Lord's exact words. To Lorien, babies were long-term investments. Each newborn might generate more than 70 years of daily silver. A crying infant was effectively a living retirement account. Lorien actively encouraged 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏's population to grow. Winter created the perfect opportunity. Citizens had little work outside their homes. They remained indoors with warm fires and full stomachs. The conditions were ideal for a future baby boom. Lorien might as well have distributed candles and romantic music. Every detail seemed designed to maximize population growth. Pete continued imitating Lorien's speech. Anyone freezing to death, the Lord had warned, would waste valuable 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 property. Lorien would march into hell itself to drag back anyone who died without permission. Martha left the warm bed, knelt on the heated floor, and wept toward the distant manor. Pete asked what the Red Leaf Viscount had ever given people like them. The old Red Leaf rulers had never provided anything in that room. The light church had never supplied warmth either. Lorien, by contrast, had demanded nothing from Martha. He had given her fire, shelter, food, and clothing. Not a single possession had been taken away. Her forehead struck the floor with a heavy thud. Martha ordered Pete to obey Lorien without hesitation. To her, Lorien had become more than an ordinary noble. She regarded him as a god wearing human skin. Martha ordered Pete to fight even a dragon if Lorien ever commanded it. Pete solemnly promised his mother that he understood. The same conversation unfolded in hundreds of 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 cabins. Families gathered around warm fires and ate meat with soft bread. Outside, a blizzard that once would have killed them struck uselessly against solid walls. While citizens celebrated, Lorien calmly reviewed the system's winter projections. He checked the system panel with the calm satisfaction of a man whose portfolio had survived a market crash. Every completed house remained warm. Every registered citizen had eaten. Warm clothing protected every body from the storm. The system projected zero population loss during winter. Other lords would wake up tomorrow and count their dead. Some territories would lose dozens, hundreds, or even thousands. Lorien expected to wake and count coins rather than corpses. The population total should remain unchanged. 6,381 silver coins were guaranteed every morning at 6, through blizzard or sunshine. Inside, warm cabins, full stomachs, and long nights encouraged citizens to follow Lorien's reproductive advice. His citizens were following orders and making babies. Future revenue was already growing inside expectant mothers. Every newborn would be registered for daily payouts the moment the child took a first breath. Lorien raised his wine toward the storm outside. He challenged winter to do its worst. Every citizen and every expected coin had been accounted for. Other lords feared snow because their people lacked protection. Lorien had invested in insulation, and the future dividends would arrive as babies. But by morning, snow reached his knees. Snow buried the territory beneath a vast white blanket. The landscape became silent and motionless. The whole world looked like it had given up and gone to sleep. Behind town, 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗥𝗡𝗖𝗏 fenced agricultural zone contained something impossible. Lorien opened greenhouse number 1 and met a wall of warm, humid air. Outside, the temperature stood 15 degrees below freezing. Inside, the soil experienced a humid spring. The greenhouse itself was crude rather than beautiful. The structure was crude and unattractive. Planks supported a roof of canvas sealed with pig fat. The light coming through was dim and greasy. It resembled a barn designed by someone who had only heard another person describe one. Beneath the greenhouse floor lay Lorien's masterpiece, heated channels connected to fire pits that circulated warm air like primitive central heating. He had sketched the design on a napkin at 2 in the morning, then ordered thousands of workers to build it within a week. Alara knelt in the soil with silver hair falling across her face. Her elegant fingers carefully brushed aside a layer of prepared compost. 2 tiny green leaves had pushed through the prepared soil. Their color looked almost impossible against the winter darkness. Fragile wheat sprouts were growing in the middle of a blizzard as though winter did not exist. Their survival defied every expectation of winter farming. Alara's entire body trembled. The trembling came from vindication rather than cold. Alara watched her life's work succeed after years of ridicule as wheat grew during a blizzard. Her composting method and Lorien's heated greenhouse had worked together. The discovery could rewrite agriculture across the continent. Lorien entered behind her, rubbing his frozen hands. He stared at the green shoots as though they were made from solid gold. With theatrical satisfaction, he observed that the plants had finally sprouted. Lorien told his agriculture minister that their compost experiment had succeeded, and Alara shot to her feet. Heat had flushed Alara's cheeks when she answered with a scholarly glare. She asked Lorien to describe the process accurately. Alara called it the combined use of aerobic composting and controlled environment thermal agriculture. Lorien shortened the explanation to poop alchemy. The crude name irritated Alara immediately. Even while correcting him, her attitude toward Lorien had changed. Her original hostility toward Lorien had faded. Suspicion and contempt no longer governed every conversation. She now regarded him with something close to awe. Brute force investment had solved in weeks what scholars had debated for centuries. Lorien had smashed an ocean of silver against nature until nature yielded. The achievement frightened Alara, but it also impressed her. The technical name did not matter to him. He waved away the academic distinction. Only measurable results interested Lorien. Those results included 20 greenhouses and 2,000 acres of winter wheat. When Lorien asked how much food the spring harvest might produce, Alara drew a deep breath. Alara's answer impressed even herself. Alara explained that the premium seed and unusually rich fertilizer made the expected harvest enormous. She estimated that the next autumn harvest could feed all 6,000 citizens for 3 years. The projected surplus was enormous. Lorien's eyes brightened with sudden ambition. His mind immediately began expanding the numbers. 6,000 people now possessed 3 years of food security. He immediately imagined tripling the population to 20,000. Even then, the harvest could support everyone for roughly 1 year. 20,000 citizens would generate 20,000 silver coins, or 200 gold coins, every day. At that rate, Lorien could purchase a small kingdom within months. He declared Alara the most valuable person in Greywood. In his excitement, he seized her dirt-covered hands and shook them vigorously. The handshake reflected financial excitement rather than romance. Lorien reacted like an executive, seeing impossible growth projections. Color rose noticeably in Alara's pale cheeks. She withdrew her hands and restored her scholarly dignity. Alara replied that Lorien had merely given her knowledge and opportunity. She insisted that she was only performing her duty. A tense pause filled the greenhouse. Then Alara's scientific caution returned. The greenhouses consumed an extreme amount of firewood. When Alara mentioned the greenhouse budget, Lorien dismissed the concern. He would burn gold itself if necessary to keep the seedlings warm. Already pulling on his bearskin coat, Lorien headed for the door. He ordered Alara to guard the sprouts like her own children. Another urgent matter required his attention. The day marked an important system test. He marched out into the blizzard, grinning so wide that snowflakes were landing on his teeth. One harvest could now provide 3 years of food. Alara had delivered exactly the agricultural breakthrough Lorien needed. Greywood was no longer merely surviving winter. It was creating enough surplus to support explosive population growth. The resulting equation delighted Lorien. More food could support more people. More people would generate more silver. More silver could purchase more food and attract even more people. The cycle could repeat indefinitely. This was more than a business plan. It was a perpetual machine powered by fertilized wheat and human greed. The 2 leaves inside the winter greenhouse represented its first proof. They were far more than 2 fragile sprouts. To Lorien, they represented the first investment in a continental agricultural empire. Alara believed she was growing wheat. Lorien believed she was growing his retirement fund. The important system test concerned the blizzard. The approaching system payout would reveal whether Greywood had truly defeated winter. It was the first settlement after the blizzard began. Every recent investment would be judged by the survival count. Success or failure would determine whether all his investment had mattered. He was back in his office. The clock showed 5:58 in the morning. Baller was standing next to him, clutching the population ledger, looking like a man waiting for medical test results. Lorien shared Baller's fear. In this world, the first snowstorm is the Grim Reaper's annual shopping trip. Each year, lords across the continent sent wagons into poor districts to collect frozen bodies. The dead were often stacked like firewood. Such losses were considered ordinary during medieval winters. He had spent 40,000 silver coins on winter supplies. Every citizen had a warm cabin, a sheepskin coat, firewood, and hot food. Even his bandit slaves in the quarry got thick blankets and hot porridge. Not because Lorien cared about their feelings, but because a frozen slave is a silver coin that stopped printing. Lorien viewed the preparations as an enormous financial hedge. Together, they formed the largest insurance policy in Greywood's history. Every copper spent during the previous weeks had led to that moment. The clock showed 5:59. Lorien drummed his fingers against the table hard enough to resemble a war signal. The last seconds passed before the clock reached 6. Ding! The system notification finally sounded. Daily settlement complete, the system announced. The system began an extreme weather survival assessment. A special system assessment made Lorien even more nervous. The system was running diagnostics like a doctor examining a patient. His heart crawled into his throat. Registered surviving population 6,381. The next line would reveal the number of deaths caused by extreme cold. He silently begged the death count to remain at 0. When the system confirmed 0 deaths, Lorien exploded from his chair. His triumphant laughter sounded evil enough to invite an exorcist. Lorien shouted that every grandmother, baby, citizen, and quarry slave had survived. Not a single registered life had been lost. He paced the room and punched the air in triumph. His silver coin fortress held. Death had knocked on Greywood's gate and been denied entry. The 40,000 silver spent on shelter, coats, fuel, and food had protected everyone. Every copper of that investment had produced a return. Greywood had achieved complete survival during a medieval blizzard. Baller did not know how Lorien knew nobody had died. The census hadn't even been taken yet, but at this point, the old man had given up trying to understand him. Baller dropped to one knee, his eyes shining, and called Greywood's survival a miracle. Baller praised Lorien's mercy and declared that Greywood would worship his name after surviving the storm. Lorien privately insisted that he was protecting an investment portfolio, but outwardly he only nodded with dignified calm. His measured nod made him appear wise and noble. Nobody outside his mind could hear the financial calculations. Then a brilliant but morally questionable idea occurred to Lorien. Greywood had suffered 0 deaths. Its citizens remained warm, fed, alive, and comfortable. Every neighboring territory within 100 miles faced the opposite result. Bodies were freezing while death counts rose. Neighboring lords were already panicking. Thousands of refugees had nowhere safe to go. Lorien suddenly saw the opportunity hidden inside the disaster. The blizzard had turned every neighboring territory into a desperate cellar. To Lorien, the blizzard was not merely a disaster. It was a regional collapse that had pushed the value of unwanted laborers to almost nothing. Other lords were desperate to remove people, and Lorien was the only buyer with money. Lorien ordered Balor to summon Mars immediately. The gold eagle merchant had to be dragged from bed if necessary. Balor protested that the snow outside was overwhelming. Balor asked what Lorien could need from the trading company. Greywood already possessed sufficient winter supplies. The warehouses were full. Lorien answered that Greywood still lacked enough people. He walked to the window and stared into the endless storm. Across Red Leaf, Black Iron City, and a dozen miserable little baronies, thousands of peasants huddled in leaking shacks and slowly froze. Their lords viewed the freezing peasants as liabilities and useless mouths. He turned around and smiled. It was the smile of someone finding opportunity among corpses. Other nobles considered those refugees disposable waste. Lorien considered them premium assets available at historic discounts. Lorien ordered Mars to carry Greywood's surplus grain and spare sheepskin coats into neighboring territories. Mars would visit every lord in the surrounding region. He would offer Greywood's help in removing their unwanted population. One living person, regardless of age or disability, could be exchanged for 1 pound of cheap black oats. If necessary, Mars could add a few copper coins. Lorien cared only that the refugees arrived alive. Half-frozen survivors had to be loaded onto carts and brought to Greywood. Mars was to collect every breathing person he could find. Balor drew a breath so sharply that the cold air seemed capable of freezing his lungs. The realization hit him like a snowball to the face. Lorien had moved beyond simply surviving winter. He was using the storm to absorb the populations that neighboring lords could not protect. He intended to purchase unwanted humans for almost nothing and register each for daily income. Other lords were losing citizens by the hour. Lorien intended to acquire those same lives at almost no cost. This strategy was no longer ordinary rescue. It was a regional population takeover funded by the system and disguised as charity. Lorien repeated the order to summon Mars. He stared into the white void outside his window with fierce determination. Before winter ended, he wanted 10,000 citizens producing 10,000 silver coins each day. While every other lord on this frozen continent was counting their dead, Lorien would be counting his new arrivals. To Lorien, winter had become a sale rather than a season. The blizzard continued for half a month. The entire continent seemed frozen into one enormous block of ice. Then Mars returned with a delivery that looked more like a disaster. Lorien waited in the square, eager to welcome the expected new citizens. Lorien imagined Greywood's population finally reaching 10,000. He imagined an endless stream of additional silver. Then his smile vanished like a candle in a hurricane. The convoy entering town did not resemble Lorien's imagined stream of future citizens. It was a horror show on wheels. It contained 1,200 desperate survivors. Calling the arrivals, people felt generous because most barely remained alive. Frostbite had swollen and infected the hands and feet of most arrivals. A third suffered delirious fevers and violent coughing. Some carried the unmistakable smell of dysentery. These arrivals were not immediately profitable assets. They were dangerous liabilities, capable of infecting the entire town. In Lorien's old world vocabulary, they resembled dangerously unstable investments. Buying them felt like purchasing junk bonds and discovering bags filled with angry bees. Lorien seized Mars and called him a fool. He shook the merchant by the collar like a snow globe. The order had been to acquire valuable living citizens. Instead, Mars had delivered more than 1,000 potential disease outbreaks. The terrified merchant shook beneath Lorien's hands. Balor reminded him that he had promised to accept anyone still alive. Mars explained that every territory was expelling its sick peasants. Many of the people had been pulled from piles of bodies. Mars insisted that these were the healthiest survivors he had been able to obtain. Lorien shoved him away and checked his system panel, trying to calm down. The system detected roughly 1,206 new citizens. The projected total income rose to about 7,500 silver coins per day. The new total should have delighted Lorien. Instead, the condition of the new arrivals made the higher number terrifying. That was approximately 75 gold coins each day. Under normal conditions, Lorien would have celebrated wildly. Instead, Lorien could not smile. The medical danger erased every trace of celebration. Lorien had ignored the true cost of buying every unwanted person in the region. His existing citizens were healthy because months of food, clean water, shelter, and sanitation had protected them. He had spent a fortune making them the healthiest peasant population in the region. Now, 1,200 contagious patients threatened that achievement. Frostbite, influenza, fever, and dysentery spread faster than market gossip. If infection reached the iron guard, builders, or greenhouse workers, 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗥𝗡𝗔𝗧𝗘𝗗 A plague might erase 6,000 healthy citizens. Daily income would not merely decline, it could collapse. 7,000 citizens could become 700, or even zero. Lorien had finally discovered the first serious law of population growth. Growth without infrastructure was suicide. Human beings could not be shoveled into a town like coins into a bag. They became sick and transmitted illness. One infected group could poison an entire settlement. Lorien had become greedy. He had grown careless. The consequences were now coughing blood onto 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗥𝗡𝗔𝗧𝗘𝗗 Greywood's Lorien immediately suspended every operation that brought new people into Greywood. There was no time for debate. Any temptation to squeeze in more arrivals disappeared. Protecting the existing population now mattered more than expansion. The suspension would continue until the present crisis was contained. The suspension would remain in force until the current refugees had been processed safely. No additional person could enter Greywood. The restriction applied to refugees, merchants, and even stray dogs. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗥𝗡𝗔𝗧𝗘𝗏 panicked beside Lorien. He asked what they should do with the sick arrivals. Sending them away would condemn most to death. Lorien warned that one infection reaching the iron guard or builders could ruin the entire winter. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗥𝗡𝗔𝗧𝗘𝗏 could not understand whether Lorien meant to reject them. Lorien angrily asked whether the butler's brain had turned into manure. Lorien clarified that the refugees would be isolated rather than abandoned. The 1,200 patients stood coughing and shivering in the square. Every one of them would produce a silver coin as long as they survived past 6 tomorrow morning. Discarding them would mean throwing money into a snowbank. Greywood could neither integrate nor abandon them. They could not approach the healthy population. They also could not be allowed to die. Quarantine was the only workable answer. Old Wolf arrived almost immediately, sensing the crisis before anyone summoned him. Lorien ordered the Iron Guard to the downwind western side of town. They had to construct a fenced quarantine zone with wooden barriers. Nobody could enter or leave without Lorien's permission. He drew his sword only to emphasize that the order was absolute. Every new arrival would enter quarantine. Emergency tents, boiled water, and at least 300 feet of separation were required. Alara was summoned because only she possessed enough scientific knowledge to manage the threat. Lorien watched guards guide the sick refugees toward quarantine. For the first time since receiving the system, he felt a new kind of fear. The fear came not from enemies or winter, but from his own greed. He had become intoxicated by the equation that more people meant more money. Now, he understood that people were not merely coins. Lives could not be stacked away and forgotten. Citizens became sick and spread disease. They required food, medicine, shelter, and constant maintenance. Lorien had treated population growth like a rising stock price. He had assumed that a larger number automatically meant success. A population was not a stock portfolio. Stocks did not contract dysentery. They did not cough infections onto one another. They could not turn a healthy town into a mass grave overnight. The 1,200 patients became an expensive lesson in responsible growth. The response required quarantine first and treatment second. Future acquisitions would require medical screening before entry. Lorien admitted to himself that he had been an idiot. Lorien remained rich and frightened, but considerably less arrogant. At least he learned from his mistakes. This mistake would cost a fortune in medicine and sleepless nights. He could only hope that Alara understood disease as well as agriculture. The western quarantine zone quickly became a landscape of medieval suffering. Tents filled with coughing, fever, infected wounds, and severe stomach illness. Many patients were too weak to stand without assistance. Inside one tent, a young refugee girl named Anna was curled up in a corner, staring at her own feet. Her swollen, cracked feet were severely infected and close to permanent damage. In red leaf territory, a sick girl like her would have been tossed into a mass grave while still breathing. Anna had already accepted that she would die unnoticed. Then rough hands suddenly seized Anna's ankle. Anna cried out, but the older woman ordered her to remain still. Without immediate cleaning, the infected feet might require amputation. The woman was Martha, Pete's mother. Only 2 weeks earlier, Anna had wept after receiving a sheepskin coat. Now she wore a linen smock, a homemade mask, and a wooden medical badge. Martha scrubbed Anna's frostbite wounds with liquor and showed no patience for complaints. Greywood's medical corps offered terrible bedside manners, but surprisingly effective care. The emergency medical system had been created from necessity. Greywood had 1,200 patients, no doctors, and almost no useful medical science. With no physicians available, Lorien improvised. Lorien drafted 300 women and elderly citizens who could not perform heavy construction. Formal training was unavailable, so willingness mattered more. Their qualifications were simple: working hands and tolerance for unpleasant work. Each new medical worker received 3 copper coins per day. For people once dismissed as useless, the paid role felt like winning a lottery. Grandmothers suddenly possessed medical duties and independent income. Once the volunteers were equipped, Lorien directed them toward the 1,200 patients. Standing outside the fence, Lorien addressed Greywood's improvised medical corps. A vinegar-soaked cloth covered his face because he refused to catch a medieval plague and lose his own daily silver coin. He reminded the volunteers that they were not tending a pile of rotting meat. They were rescuing citizens whose lives still belonged to Greywood. For every patient they pulled back from death, they would receive full wages and half a pound of white flour. That promise transformed 300 elderly women and retired men into the most motivated medical staff on the continent. They stormed the quarantine tents like an emergency rescue team. Workers stripped the patients' wet clothes. They scrubbed every patient with hot water, whether anyone protested or not. They forced bitter herbal soup between chattering teeth. They cleaned open wounds with strong alcohol. They cut away dead tissue with heated knives. There was no anesthesia and little gentleness. It was crude battlefield medicine administered by grandparents who were paid for every survivor. Outside the quarantine zone, Greywood's improvised chief medical officer was already reaching her limit. Alara's silver hair was twisted into a messy bun. Her face was smeared with soot. She stood over enormous iron pots and shouted at workers to stir faster. She frantically compared botanical notes, trying to identify herbs that might treat frostbite without poisoning everyone. Alara called Lorien an insatiable lunatic. When Alara noticed Lorien behind the fence, her remaining patients disappeared. She reminded him that she was a plant science scholar, not a physician. Treating frostbite was far beyond her formal training. Lorien was forcing her to choose medicines by comparing damaged flesh with diseased roots. Alara warned that any death caused by a bad prescription would be his responsibility. Lorien stood behind the fence in his bearskin coat, calmly holding the vinegar cloth over his face. Herbal medicine still depended on plants, so Lorien trusted Alara's expertise. An experimental treatment was still better than leaving the patients untreated. The only alternative was allowing the refugees to rot inside those tents. Alara opened her mouth twice, but no argument came out. She had no answer because Lorien was technically right, the most infuriating kind of right. Lorien knew Greywood's hospital would horrify any real physician. Doctors from his former world would have fainted at the improvised treatment methods. This world's accepted treatment was to drain blood and hope for the best, a method with terrible odds of success. Lorien's approach relied on simple principles from his former world. The volunteers had to boil water, clean wounds, isolate patients, wash everyone, serve herbal broth, and monitor every condition. The methods did not qualify as modern medical science. They combined aggressive hygiene, limited herbal knowledge, and desperate hope. But against medieval standards, it was brain surgery. Inside one tent, Anna drank scalding herbal meat broth, while Martha poured it down her throat with relentless determination. Color was returning to her face. Her feet were clean, bandaged, and no longer actively decomposing. Tears ran down Anna's cheeks as she asked why Lorien was spending so much to save people like them. Martha gave no answer because she was already moving toward the next patient. Martha moved to another patient and cut dead tissue from a hand with the confidence of someone trained for years, not hours. Calling in a sweetheart, Martha spoke with the fierce pride of a woman earning her first wages at 53. She explained that Lord Lorien considered anyone who could still breathe worth saving. Martha repeated Lorien's promise that even a crippled survivor who could only twist rope would remain valuable to Greywood. The words sounded noble and deeply compassionate, even though Lorien had framed them as asset protection. That was a generous interpretation of Lorien's actual order, which had simply been to keep everyone alive. He did not care whether a survivor had lost fingers, feet, or an entire limb. A breathing person still counted as 1 silver coin every day. But Martha didn't need to know the accounting behind the compassion. The result was the same. People were finally being saved. Outside the fence, Lorien watched the health indicator halt its plunge and slowly begin to recover. Whether Lorien was a good person remained debatable. Whether he was saving 1,200 lives was not. The answer was undeniable. His emergency program was saving them. His motive was equally clear. Every survivor represented a daily silver coin that he refused to lose. Completely selfish or not, the desperate plan was beginning to work. To Lorien, the refugees were not merely patients. They were damaged gears that could still be cleaned, repaired, and returned to motion. With boiling water, herbal broth, relentless grandmothers, and one furious half-elf botanist, most of those failing bodies could recover. Every recovered citizen would produce another system notification at 6 the next morning. That result was all Lorien needed. He silently urged every damaged gear to keep turning. His daily deposit depended on them. Just as Lorien thought the health crisis was stabilizing, fuel emergency struck the town. Baller crashed through his door at midnight like a human cannonball. His lips were purple, his hands shook, and he waved a parchment report like a death warrant. Baller explained that workers had already cut down every tree within safe traveling distance. Only a few scattered piles of firewood remained. Lorien rose so quickly that his chair crashed backward. He demanded to know how much time remained. Baller estimated that the town had no more than 3 days of fuel. He added that the quarantine zone was consuming firewood twice as quickly as planned. Medical bonfires, boiling cauldrons, greenhouse furnaces, and thousands of household fireplaces were consuming wood without pause. Lorien asked what would happen after those 3 days. First, the greenhouse furnaces would go dark. Every wheat sprout Alara had raised would freeze to death. Next, the household fireplaces would fail. Then 7,000 citizens would be trapped inside frozen wooden boxes. Lorien struck the table so hard that the ink bottle jumped. Greywood now faced an energy crisis. This was the ugly calculation Lorien had ignored. 7,000 fireplaces burning throughout the day could consume an entire forest with frightening speed. Sending lumberjacks into the deep forest during a blizzard at 20 degrees below freezing would be suicidal. He would lose dozens of men per trip. Each dead lumberjack would also erase another daily silver coin. That casualty rate was completely unacceptable. Greywood had no coal, oil, gas, or electricity, and its citizens had already stripped every nearby tree. This fuel limit placed a natural ceiling on the size of every medieval town. A settlement could burn only a limited amount of wood. Greywood had reached that ceiling, and it was about to collapse onto Lorien's entire operation. Lorien even considered paying Mars's Gold Eagle Company an enormous fee to haul charcoal from distant cities. Transporting it through the blizzard would probably cost more than the fuel itself. Before he could decide, Old Wolf burst through the door, covered from head to toe in snow. He reported an emergency at the quarry. Lorien demanded to know what had gone wrong this time. The slave miners had struck an unusually soft black layer beneath the stone. A strange black substance was spreading through the deepest section of the pit. Every miner who touched it became coated in dark dust. The terrified prisoners believed they had dug into a demon's toilet. Lorien stared at Old Wolf and asked him to repeat that final detail. 30 minutes later, Lorien stood at the edge of the quarry during the blizzard. Holding a torch, he stared at 34 terrified bandit slaves, who looked as though they had been dipped in ink. Scarface Kyle threw himself at his feet, wailing. The captured bandits begged Lorien for mercy. Kyle insisted that they had only been mining stone as ordered. The material beneath the quarry did not behave like ordinary rock. It was completely black and crumbled beneath a pickaxe. Dark powder stained every hand and tool that touched it. The substance also carried a sharp, unfamiliar odor. The prisoners were convinced that it was demon excrement. They believed the mine was cursed. Every slave was coated from head to toe in black dust. Only their frightened eyes remained clearly visible. They looked less like miners than ghosts dragged from a chimney. Lorien ignored the crying. Lorien walked into the pit and picked up one of the black stones. The stone was light and soft, and it left dark powder on Lorien's glove when squeezed. A faint, dull sheen moved across its surface. Excitement accelerated Lorien's heartbeat. His capitalist sixth sense, the instinct that reacted whenever profit was nearby, began screaming. Lorien moved the torch toward the strange material. The black stone resisted the flame for only a moment. Its surface began glowing red. Then the stone caught fire, releasing more heat than wood and a sharp sulfurous odor. Lorien stood there in the blizzard, holding a burning rock, watching it glow orange in his hand. Every problem that had terrified him 3 minutes earlier evaporated like steam. Lorien called the substance 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗥𝗡𝗔𝗧𝗘𝗗. He spun around in the snowstorm and started laughing. His laughter became a full-bodied cackle that echoed from every quarry wall. Balor and Old Wolf exchanged worried glances. They thought the stress had finally broken him. Lorien called Balor and Gareth closer to examine the burning stone. Lorien held the burning stone above his head like a prophet holding a holy relic. Its orange glow illuminated Lorien's delighted expression through the snow. Lorien declared that the black material was not ordinary rock. He identified the black stone as coal. To Lorien, the entire scene was black gold. This single deposit held enough fuel to defeat Greywood's winter crisis. The answer had been buried directly beneath the quarry. An exposed seam stretched through the rock. It lay directly beneath their feet. The bandit slaves had accidentally uncovered what might be the largest energy deposit in the region. Firewood eventually disappeared, while replacement forests required years to mature. Coal offered a resource that could be mined instead of slowly regrown. That reality imposed a strict limit on the number of fireplaces a town could support. Coal changed every part of that calculation. Coal burned much longer than ordinary wood. It could be stacked, stored, transported, and rationed. Coal meant Alara's greenhouses could remain warm. The same fuel could heat every house in Greywood. It could keep all 7,000 citizens alive. Coal also removed the territory's winter population limit. With enough coal, Lorien could support 50,000 citizens through winter, perhaps even 100,000. The scale of his ambitions changed immediately. Lorien turned toward the soot-covered bandit slaves. He regarded the filthy, terrified prisoners as accidental geniuses who had saved his entire territory. He praised Kyle for the accidental discovery. Lorien told Kyle that the discovery had provided a legendary service to Greywood. Hope brightened Kyle's soot-covered face. Ding, the system confirmed his promotion. Kyle asked whether the discovery had earned their freedom. Lorien answered that regular citizens received heat without charge. His warm expression turned cold in an instant. Kyle's optimism had lasted only a few seconds. Lorien immediately decided how the discovery would change the prisoners' work. Lorien promoted them to Greywood's first official coal mining division. Each miner would receive 2 sturdy pickaxes. Their rations would increase to 2 bowls of oat porridge. They would also receive warm leather coats. Lorien proudly called it the premium slave package. Kyle's hope died so visibly that everyone around him noticed. Lorien ordered Gareth to convert the quarry into a coal mine. Lorien demanded continuous extraction throughout the day and night. Old Wolf saluted so hard he nearly dislocated his shoulder. Old Wolf decided that the new mining division deserved a motto. Old Wolf proposed a simple motto: if the mine did not kill them, they should keep digging. Lorien ordered enough black gold mined to supply every fireplace by sunrise. Lorien marched back through the blizzard while cackling like a victorious villain. The coal still glowed in his hand like a small orange star. 3 hours earlier, Lorien had believed his entire operation was approaching extinction. Greywood had almost no firewood and no obvious replacement. Without new fuel, complete collapse would arrive in only 3 days. Now Lorien was standing on top of an energy reserve that could power a city. Greywood's dependence on firewood was ending. Its coal age had begun. Neighboring lords still rationed every stick and prayed their firewood would last until spring. Greywood had entered an industrial age through a quarry worked by bandit slaves who thought coal was cursed waste. The fuel crisis was solved, and the population ceiling had vanished. The road toward 10,000 citizens was open again. Somewhere in that dark mine, 34 shivering ex-bandits lifted their new pickaxes. They slowly realized that their promotion meant mining coal for the rest of their natural lives. At least the promotion included double porridge. That small consolation was all they received. When the first coal cart reached the square, citizens stared at it as though someone had delivered a bomb made from dragon waste. Pete asked whether the foul-smelling black material could truly burn. To him, it smelled like a demon's breath. He poked a lump with the end of his spear, while keeping his body as far away as possible. His face twisted as though someone had struck him with a dirty sock. A sharp blow interrupted Pete's inspection. Old Wolf struck the back of Pete's head hard enough to make his teeth click. Old Wolf ordered Pete to stop complaining and listen. If Lord Lorien said the black stone burned, then it burned. If Lorien claimed ice was flammable, Old Wolf would order miners to rub icicles together. Lorien admired that unquestioning loyalty. Old Wolf carried a coal lump the size of his head into the nearest cabin. He threw it directly into the dying fireplace. For several minutes, nothing happened except a thin curl of smoke. Then a faint blue haze rose above the coal. Its surface slowly began to glow. Instead of bright wooden flames, a deep red pulse spread through the stone. A powerful wave of heat followed. Old Wolf had been standing 3 feet from the fireplace. The sudden heat forced him 3 steps backward with his eyes wide. He shouted that the black stone produced 3 times the heat of red pine. Lorien calmly answered that this was exactly why coal mattered. That night, every chimney in Greywood released thin black smoke carrying a faint sulfur smell. The smell remained unpleasant. It smelled like rotten eggs from hell, but nobody complained while their homes remained warm. To Greywood citizens, that sulfur odor was the perfume of survival. Citizens stood beside their fireplaces in light clothing while a blizzard raged outside. A town that had lacked proper walls 6 months earlier now complained that its houses were too hot. But the greatest beneficiary was Alara's network of greenhouses. Alara stood inside her temperature-controlled wheat greenhouse and stared at the new heating channels. Her expression showed that coal had overturned everything she believed about winter farming. Wood burned quickly and forced workers to feed the furnaces every 2 hours. One sleeping night worker could allow the temperature to crash and destroy every seedling. That danger had kept Alara anxious for weeks. Coal changed everything because one full furnace burned steadily for 8 hours. It needed no constant attention and delivered reliable heat through the night. When Lorien entered, Alara immediately attacked him with excited questions. She demanded to know where he had learned about the strange mineral. She suspected an ancient text or a hidden scholarly archive. With coal, Alara could raise the greenhouse temperature by another 5 degrees. She could even attempt to grow summer vegetables during the middle of winter. The idea of summer vegetables growing in a blizzard thrilled her. Alara was ready to challenge nature itself with material the miners had mistaken for cursed waste. Lorien first claimed that an ancient text had revealed coal's value. Then he admitted that his true guide was a capitalist's nose for profit. He removed his bearskin coat because the greenhouse had become uncomfortably warm. He unbuttoned his shirt collar in January inside a tent while a blizzard raged outside. Lorien ordered Alara to inform the medical corps in the quarantine district. Every medical fire pit had to be converted to coal. The healers could now boil clean water without interruption. The boilers would remain active throughout the day and night. If the tent stayed warm enough, the refugees would have a better chance of surviving. More heat meant faster recovery. Faster recovery meant fewer deaths. Fewer deaths meant more silver coins. At 6 the next morning, the logic was flawless. At that moment, the clock reached 6 and the system chimed. The system announced that the daily settlement was complete. The surviving population stood at 7,587. The system also detected an energy upgrade created by Greywood's use of coal. The risk of citizens freezing to death had fallen to a minimal level. Overall, population health was recovering. The daily payout reached 7,587 silver coins. For the first time since the rescue mission, the population count had stopped falling. The territory's overall health indicators continued to recover. The projected risk of death from freezing dropped to a minimal level. In 12 hours, Lorien had moved from a 3-day collapse countdown to unmatched energy security. The coal discovery had begun with bandit slaves being punished for trying to rob him. The irony was thick enough to resemble another mineral deposit. Greywood's crises now seemed to follow a strange but consistent pattern. Each disaster began with the possibility of collapse. Lorien panicked, found an unlikely solution, and somehow became richer than before. He sat by the window, sipping hot tea, watching snow swirl past the glass, feeling genuinely relaxed for the first time in days. The energy crisis had ended, and the quarantine zone was stabilizing. More than 7,000 warm citizens now generated about 75 gold coins daily. Nobody yet knew how far the coal seam extended. The exposed section alone appeared enormous. Lorien murmured that all he needed to do now was wait safely for spring. Those were dangerous words in Greywood. Beyond the walls and warm chimneys, the frozen wasteland was hiding another threat. Winter made hungry creatures desperate, and desperate creatures had sharp teeth. That danger could wait until morning. For one night, Lorien enjoyed hot tea, a heated office, and 7,587 reasons to smile. Greywood's industrial revolution had arrived. carrying the smell of rotten eggs. It was ugly, sulfurous, and wonderfully profitable. Lorien had just promised himself that Greywood only needed to survive until spring. The universe appeared determined to punish that confidence. 30 miles away, more than 200 nightmares marched through the frozen pine forest. These nightmares were not a metaphor. They were half 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗐𝗘𝗏, each 7 feet tall, with green skin, thick muscles, and curved tusks. Every warrior looked like a walking refrigerator with severe anger problems. They carried enormous bone clubs and rusty iron slabs that barely qualified as weapons. Their chief was Bone Crusher 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏, brutal warrior who had not eaten in 3 days. His whole tribe was starving. Even the goblins they usually snacked on had vanished. More than 200 starving half 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏s had nothing left to lose and everything nearby to eat. Then the wind shifted and carried the sulfur odor of Greywood's coal fires. 𝗥𝗏𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏's enormous green nose detected 2 promising scents. One was roasted, salted pork, and the other was thousands of human bodies. Half 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏s called humans 2-legged sheep, which revealed exactly what they planned to do. 𝗥𝗏𝗡 ordered his tribe to find the meat and tear it apart. He also ordered them to seize Greywood's fire. The green warriors charged toward town like a stampede of furious wagons. One fact made the approaching attack especially dangerous. A single adult half 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 could tear apart 3 armed human soldiers with his bare hands. Even professional knights avoided fighting them on foot. 200 half 𝗥𝗚𝗏𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏s were charging Greywood's wooden defenses like a living natural disaster. At 1 in the morning, the ground began to shake. The night sentry felt the vibrations, looked into the darkness, and immediately screamed the alarm. The sentry recognized that an enemy force was approaching rapidly. The horn tore through the blizzard. Old Wolf was out of bed and holding his sword before his pants were even on properly. From the defense platform, Old Wolf saw more than 200 massive green silhouettes charging through the snow. The approaching enemies were half 𝗥𝗚𝗏𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏s. Old Wolf stared into the storm and demanded to know why half 𝗥𝗚𝗏𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏s were here. Old Wolf had fought their kind during his army service. He understood exactly how dangerous they were. They were walking meat grinders, the kind of enemy that made retreat sound heroic. Pete stood beside him with a shaking spear, staring at creatures shaped like buildings with teeth. Pete asked Old Wolf whether the Iron Guard could stop the approaching half 𝗥𝗚𝗏𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏s. Old Wolf slapped Pete across the face so hard it echoed over the blizzard. Old Wolf's violent encouragement immediately restored Pete's attention. Old Wolf admitted that they could not overpower the monsters in a fair fight. Then he reminded every soldier about the warm beds waiting behind them. He reminded Pete about the salted meat his mother had received that day. If the half 𝗥𝗚𝗏𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏s broke through, there would be no porridge for anyone tomorrow. 500 Iron Guard soldiers roared for Greywood and snapped fully awake. Their fear vanished beneath the stronger fear of losing everything they had gained. Every soldier completed the same cost-benefit calculation in an instant. The first choice was to fight terrifying monsters and risk death. The second was to surrender their homes, food, wages, and families. Returning to starvation in roadside ditches frightened them more than any green warrior. To the Iron Guard, surrender was more frightening than the enemy. Old Wolf ordered the spears held at 45 degrees and forbade anyone from stepping back. A deafening crash shook the gate. The half 𝗥𝗚𝗏𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏s struck the wooden fence like a green wave hitting a sandcastle. Boards splintered and support posts snapped. 𝗥𝗏𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 smashed through an entire section with one swing of his bone club. Instead of terrified screams, the half 𝗥𝗚𝗏𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏s heard the Iron Guard roar a single order to stab. Hundreds of spearheads drove forward at once. A forest of iron spears waited beyond the broken gate. Dozens of iron points struck the charging half 𝗥𝗚𝗏𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏s and turned their own momentum against them. Green bodies jerked backward beneath the impact. Dark green blood sprayed across the white snow in steaming arcs. The front rank became a wall of wounded bodies and embedded spears. Even thick half 𝗥𝗚𝗏𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏s skin could not stop sharpened iron driven at full speed. Strength offered no protection from physics. 𝗥𝗏𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏s stumbled backward in shock. Something about this battle felt wrong. Human militias were supposed to carry sticks, bone tools, and perhaps a rusty knife. They were not supposed to possess military-grade iron weapons or maintain a disciplined formation. Then 𝗥𝗏𝗡 noticed the defender's eyes. The small humans looked even more desperate and violent than his own warriors. They stared at the half 𝗥𝗚𝗏𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏s like hunters studying trapped prey. Lorien's voice then cut through the storm with cold, calculated authority. He announced new orders for the Iron Guard. Every soldier listened for the promised reward. Lorien reminded them that half 𝗥𝗚𝗏𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏s were living creatures. Every soldier immediately focused on Lorien's next words. The soldiers understood that Lorien wanted prisoners. Dead half-ORCs could never become productive citizens. Lorien ordered the Iron Guard to capture them alive. They were to cut ankle tendons only when necessary. Every breathing prisoner had to be restrained and delivered to the square. 500 soldiers needed only a moment to process the command. Then they surged forward to capture the Green Warriors. Lorien promised white bread for every living prisoner. The Iron Guard shifted from desperate defense to aggressive pursuit almost instantly. They poured through the broken fence and chased the larger warriors across the snow. 500 fed, armed, highly motivated humans pursued more than 200 starving half-ORCs. Their goal was capture rather than slaughter. To Lorien, every half-ORC represented a profitable legal question. The system already counted registered slaves as citizens. Therefore, every captured warrior might become another daily silver coin. Other lords saw half-ORCs and thought only of danger. Lorien wondered whether thumbprints and legal ownership could turn them into registered residents. 200 prisoners could add 200 silver coins to every daily payout. He repeatedly ordered his soldiers to take them alive. Every breathing captive would earn the responsible soldiers an additional bonus. 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 stood in the snow and watched screaming humans hamstring warriors twice their size. For the first time in his brutal life, the half-ORC chief experienced deep, bewildered fear. The half-ORCs could not understand why their intended prey was hunting them instead. The battle ended in less than an hour, and the result was never close. On an open field, 500 militia against 200 half-ORCs would have been a massacre. The Green Warriors would have crushed Greywood's men like boulders rolling through twigs. But Greywood's narrow gate prevented them from using their full strength. Only a small number could enter the fight at one time. The Iron Guard was fed, armed, rested, and desperate to protect its new life. The half-ORCs were starving, freezing, and weakened by 3 days without food. The exhausted half-ORCs resembled a dying raid boss attacking a fully prepared party. There was absolutely no contest. By sunrise, the snow had stopped and the battlefield had been cleared. 120 half-ORC bodies lay stacked beyond the walls like a terrifying pile of firewood. The remaining 82 survivors, including 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏, knelt in the snowy square with their hands and feet chained. Every prisoner expected an execution. Captured half-ORCs were normally executed without delay. Human armies almost never allowed them to survive captivity. That hatred had shaped both races for generations. Humans killed half-ORCs, and half-ORCs killed humans. It was the brutal cycle of life on the frontier. Lorien approached 𝗥𝗘𝗓𝗡 while eating toasted white bread and wearing his bearskin coat. He looked rested, despite the battle that had ended only hours earlier. 𝗥𝗘𝗓𝗡 glared at him with murderous red eyes from a body more than 7 feet tall. Lorien ignored the tusks, muscles, and obvious desire to tear him apart. Instead, Lorien reached out and squeezed his arm. He even knocked against 𝗥𝗏𝗡's back as though testing a melon at the market. The half-ORC's arm was thicker than Lorien's waist. Striking his back felt like hitting a boulder. His skin was as rough as unfinished leather. Ordinary blades would struggle to cut through it. Lorien whispered that the captured half-ORCs were perfect for Greywood's next expansion. His expression made even the victorious soldiers uneasy. To Lorien, the half-ORCs were masterpieces of natural engineering. 𝗥𝗘𝗓𝗏 retreated so quickly that he nearly tripped over his own feet. 𝗥𝗏𝗓 begged his lord to step away from the monster. 𝗥𝗏𝗓 warned that half-ORCs were known to eat humans. He insisted that half-ORCs possessed no reason or restraint. 𝗥𝗏𝗓 demanded their immediate execution before they escaped. Lorien reacted as though his butler had suggested burning Greywood's treasury. To everyone else, the prisoners were cannibals with tusks and enormous muscles. To Lorien, they were powerful laborers waiting for legal registration. He presented the chained creatures like a merchant displaying premium equipment. One half-ORC possessed the strength of roughly 3 adult men. Their thick skin resisted falling stones, cold weather, and exhausting labor. They required little clothing and could survive on extremely poor food. Lorien described them as living, all-terrain excavation machines. 𝗥𝗏𝗓𝗏's expression became completely blank while he processed that description. The system's possible reaction mattered even more than their physical strength. If registered as slaves, every survivor might produce 1 silver coin daily. They could mine coal while simultaneously increasing Lorien's passive income. It was like owning a bulldozer that also printed money. Lorien ordered the registration clerk to prepare parchment and charcoal ink. Then Lorien rested his sword against 𝗥𝗘𝗜𝗡𝗖𝗔𝗏 enormous green throat. 𝗥𝗘𝗓 could give a thumbprint or watch every surviving tribe member die. Humiliation filled 𝗥𝗘𝗓𝗡's face as he surrendered to opponents half his size. His thumb left an imprint almost as large as Lorien's entire palm. Lorien watched the system panel while the square held its breath. The system confirmed 82 registered 𝗥𝗡𝗓𝗡 slaves. Greywood's registered population rose to 7,669. Their presence increased heavy labor efficiency by 300%. The system did not care about skin color, species, tusks, or ancestry. Anything alive and legally registered could become a dividend-producing citizen. Lorien had gained 82 coins daily and a powerful mining workforce. Their maintenance costs remained low because they tolerated cold and rough food. He immediately assigned every captive to Greywood's expanding coal mine. The surviving bandit slaves would supervise the 𝗥𝗡𝗓𝗡s under Iron Guard protection. Each 𝗥𝗡𝗓𝗡 received the largest pickaxe available in the territory. Coal extraction would continue around the clock under strict production quotas. Failure to meet the quota meant reduced rations, while obedience guaranteed survival. 𝗥𝗘𝗓𝗡 had expected torture, execution, or his skull displayed on a stake. Instead, the human baron gave his tribe work and regular meals. The arrangement was still slavery, but it was better than execution. Even 𝗥𝗘𝗓𝗡 understood the simple command to dig black stone in exchange for food. Lorien watched his new green mining fleet march toward the quarry. Every prisoner produced income and performed the labor of several humans. The failed invasion had accidentally expanded Greywood's industrial capacity. Lorien then ordered Baller to prepare for the end of winter. Once roads reopened, Merchant Mars would redirect half his caravan fleet. Greywood was about to enter the regional fuel export business. Lorien planned to market the territory's premium coal as black gold. Every lord within 100 miles desperately needed reliable winter fuel. Their forests were shrinking while their subjects froze in poorly heated homes. Greywood possessed a massive coal seam and 82 tireless miners. Its supply could exceed everything the territory itself could consume. Demand was enormous, competition was non-existent, and knowledge remained scarce. Most neighboring rulers did not even know that the black stone could burn. Lorien intended to create the continent's first organized energy monopoly. Greywood coal would sell heat wherever caravans could safely travel. The project promised extraordinary margins with almost no direct competition. The mine finally explained Lorien's mysterious wealth. Nobody would question a baron who became rich through valuable exports. The public story would hide the population dividend system completely. Merchants would simply report that Greywood possessed an exceptional coal deposit. That explanation sounded ordinary enough to satisfy suspicious neighboring nobles. The 𝗥𝗡𝗓𝗡s had attacked Greywood, hoping to steal food and warmth. Instead, their invasion provided workers for Lorien's greatest commercial industry. Every crisis seemed determined to make Greywood stronger than before. Refugees had increased revenue and supplied a loyal construction workforce. Bandits had become soldiers' trophies and permanent quarry laborers. A condemned half-elf scholar had created an agricultural revolution. A deadly blizzard had allowed Greywood to acquire abandoned populations cheaply. A medical emergency had forced Lorien to build organized public healthcare. A fuel shortage had revealed the coal buried beneath his territory. Now, 𝗥𝗡𝗓𝗡 raiders had become the engines of that new industry. Lorien's methods remained greedy, ruthless, absurd, and often terrifying. Yet every selfish calculation demanded that his people remain alive. Feeding them increased income, so he guaranteed food as a right. Housing them preserved revenue, so he rebuilt every collapsing home. Disease threatened profits, so he created toilets, baths, and quarantine. War threatened the population, so he armed the Iron Guard. Winter threatened every heartbeat, so he bought coats and discovered coal. His citizens saw mercy, while Lorien saw excellent asset protection. The difference in motivation no longer mattered to Greywood's survivors. They had food, wages, dignity, homes, medicine, heat, and protection. Their lord had transformed discarded people into the territory's greatest strength. Greywood was no longer a forgotten mud village at the empire's edge. It had become a growing city with agriculture, industry, soldiers, and trade. Lorien still dreamed of returning to the capital that destroyed his family. Before that day, he would make Greywood richer than any rival territory. Any future enemy who attacked Greywood might simply become another employee. Lorien even began wondering whether the system could register a dragon. Whatever came next, Greywood's money machine would never stop growing.